A millionaire sees his ex-wife at a shelter. She's holding a baby he doesn't recognize. When the truth comes out, his world falls apart. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Marcus Bennett adjusted the lapel of his tailored navy blazer as he stepped out of his sleek black SUV in front of the Dorchester Community Shelter. It was a brisk afternoon in Boston, and the wind carried a hint of winter's chill. Marcus, 48 years old, was used to more polished surroundings, plush carpeted boardrooms and marble-floored penthouses. But he had insisted on visiting this place in person. After all, this shelter was one of several supported by the charitable foundation he had established to improve the public image of Bennett Properties. Yet beneath his carefully composed facade, he was fighting a restlessness that wouldn't let him sleep at night. He walked through the double doors with an assured stride, scanning the modest lobby. The fluorescent lighting cast a harsh glow on the worn chairs lined against the walls. A frail-looking teenage girl clutched a small toddler to her chest, both wrapped in a thin blanket. An elderly man in a heavy coat studied Marcus with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Marcus nodded politely, offering a rehearsed half-smile before searching for the shelter's director, Grace Sullivan. Grace was a warm presence in her early 60s, with gentle grey eyes and a manner that exuded calm. Spotting Marcus, she approached with a welcoming smile. "Mr. Bennett, it's nice to see you again," she said, extending her hand. "Good afternoon, Miss Sullivan," he replied, voice resonating with quiet confidence. "I'd like to see how things are running and whether you have everything you need." She motioned for him to follow her down a short corridor that led to a small office. On the way, they passed volunteers distributing meals from large steel vats. The smell of soup mingled with the faint scent of disinfectant. Marcus's polished leather shoes clicked on the cracked linoleum floor, a sharp contrast to the hush of resigned voices around him. "I appreciate your ongoing support," Grace said once they were inside her cramped office, furnished with worn wooden chairs and a battered desk piled high with paperwork. "Donations have been helpful, especially as the colder months approach." Marcus gave a curt nod. "I'm glad the foundation can help. If there's anything more..." He stopped mid-sentence when, through the narrow window in the office door, he saw a familiar silhouette in the hallway. A woman stood there, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. Her reddish-brown hair spilled over her shoulders, framing a face that, even from a distance, he recognized all too well. His breath caught in his throat. Grace noticed his change in demeanor. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently, following his gaze. Marcus's voice came out in a hush. "That woman is Emma Bennett, my ex-wife." Through the small pane of glass, he observed Emma cradling a newborn in her arms. She wore an oversized coat, sleeves frayed at the edges, her cheeks were hollow, and her posture suggested exhaustion. There was a trembling determination in her stance as she gently rocked the baby. Marcus felt a surge of memories flood him. Images of their happier days, the conflicts that tore them apart, the painful final argument that ended in hurried divorce papers, but nothing prepared him for the tiny life she held close. Grace hesitated. "She showed up a few weeks ago with her newborn, Oliver. I assumed you knew, but from your expression it seems you didn't." He swallowed hard, regaining some composure. "We haven't spoken in a year. She left abruptly after the divorce." His mind raced. He had ended their marriage because Emma, at least according to the doctors, was unable to conceive. He had been frustrated and angry, feeling robbed of the chance to have a family. The argument spiraled out of control, and in one cruel, impulsive move, he filed for divorce. Now, the sight of her nursing a child, his child, shook him more deeply than any business deal ever could. "I'll excuse myself," Grace murmured, sensing the tension. "If you'd like to speak with her, you have my permission to walk around the shelter, but please keep in mind this is a sensitive situation." Marcus managed a stiff nod. His pulse thrummed in his ears as he left the office and moved slowly down the hallway. He watched Emma from a short distance, uncertain how to approach. She was cooing softly to the baby, her expression a jumble of tenderness and caution. Gathering his courage, he stepped forward. "Emma," he murmured, voice unsteady. She turned, eyes wide and dark circles under them. For a moment, she pressed the baby closer, as though shielding him from an unknown threat. Their gazes locked, his filled with shock and guilt, hers filled with guarded resentment. The hallway felt unbearably narrow. Marcus swallowed the knot in his throat and took another hesitant step forward. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to demand an explanation, yet the words tangled in his chest. Emma tightened her grip on the baby's blanket, and he realized that the child must be very young, likely only a few weeks old. Before he could say anything further, Emma gave him a look filled with 1,000 unspoken emotions. Then she turned away, leaving Marcus in a silent corridor where every regret he'd ever felt gathered, pressing heavily on his chest. He had come to the shelter to do a routine charitable check, but instead he found the ex-wife he never truly stopped caring about and a fragile newborn who might very well be his son. Marcus stood in the corridor long after Emma left, his heart pounding as if he'd just run a marathon. The realization that the baby in her arms could be his own child nearly paralyzed him. Every moment of their marriage, every dispute, every tearful night, every unspoken wish for a family came flooding back. When he finally managed to move, he slipped outside, needing fresh air to steady himself. He stepped out onto a small concrete stoop behind the shelter. The mid-afternoon sun was waning, casting elongated shadows. Marcus pressed his back against the brick wall, shutting his eyes to calm his ragged breathing. His entire body felt unmoored, as though the ground beneath him might crack open. Suddenly, he heard the shelter's rear door creak. He opened his eyes to see Grace stepping out, her expression gentle. "Are you all right?" she asked, folding her arms against the chill. "I'm sorry if the shock was too much. I had no idea you weren't aware of Emma's situation." Marcus swallowed hard. I thought she couldn't have children. That was part of why we got divorced." Grace glanced toward the horizon. "She arrived here about a month ago. She seemed unwell, exhausted, undernourished. The baby was clearly premature and needed extra care. She never spoke about you, but I guess there was some history." He rubbed his temples, the ache of regret flaring. "I had no clue she was pregnant. I would have—" He broke off, uncertain what he would have done. Would he have tried to stop the divorce, or would his anger have blinded him further? Grace's voice softened. "She mentioned her financial resources ran out. Most of it went toward medical expenses. Emma said she had nowhere else to turn." Marcus's eyes widened. She had a settlement from the divorce. It should have been enough to keep her comfortable for at least a year, if not more. A shadow flickered across Grace's face. High-risk pregnancy can be extremely expensive, especially if she needed specialized care. She seemed afraid too, as if... Well, I don't want to pry, but it felt like she was running from something, not just poverty. His thoughts spun. Could Emma have believed that he wouldn't want to be part of this child's life? Or was she afraid of something else entirely, maybe rumors that he'd think she'd lied about her infertility? The swirl of possible misunderstandings made his chest tighten. "I have to talk to her," he said at last, pushing off from the wall. "I need answers." He found Emma an hour later in a small side room used as a makeshift nursery for mothers with infants. The soft hum of a portable heater filled the space. Emma was rocking the baby, Oliver, as he'd heard Grace mention, while humming a lullaby under her breath. He walked in quietly, mindful not to startle her. She glanced up, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and lingering hurt. "What are you doing here?" His voice trembled. "I just want to talk." Emma's posture stiffened. "There's nothing to discuss. You made your choice. You signed the divorce papers without a second thought. Don't pretend you suddenly care." A sliver of shame surged through him. He remembered the day he demanded the divorce, the icy tone, the accusations hurled about her pretending to try for a child, the bitterness he let consume him. "I was ignorant," he murmured, stepping closer. "I didn't know you were pregnant." She lowered her eyes to the baby. "I found out that morning. I wanted to tell you, but you were so angry, so ready to end things." Her voice quavered with the memory. Marcus's gaze flicked to Oliver, who stirred in Emma's arms, his tiny face pinched as if sensing the tension. "He's mine, isn't he?" Emma hesitated. Then she nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I didn't know what to do. I was terrified you'd think I did it on purpose, like I was trying to trap you or something. I couldn't face you." A surge of protective instinct welled in his chest. He studied the child's miniature fingers, the small tuft of hair. It struck him that this baby might be the greatest gift he'd ever longed for, and he'd missed every moment leading up to his birth. "Let me help," he said quietly. "Let me do something for you and for him." Emma held Oliver a little tighter, her chin trembling. "I don't want your pity, and I don't trust you. You disappeared when I needed you most." His breath caught, but he couldn't deny the truth. "I know, but I'm here now. I just need a chance to fix this, Emma." She shook her head, tears finally falling. Without another word, she rose to leave, the baby pressed protectively against her chest. Marcus watched her walk away, heart aching, mind racing with the devastating realization that all the power and money in the world couldn't bring back lost time or heal wounds so easily. Marcus woke up the next morning in his penthouse overlooking the Charles River, the panoramic view of Boston shrouded in grey light. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a man who had barely slept, eyes bloodshot, shoulders tense as if bracing for an oncoming storm. He sipped cold coffee from a porcelain mug, checking emails on his phone. Dozens of messages clamored for his attention. Board members wanted updates. His chief financial officer, Henry Caldwell, insisted on urgent meetings, and various social invitations piled up. He ignored most of them. He kept replaying the moment Emma confirmed the child was his. He recalled the heartbreak on her face, the tremble in her voice. Guilt gnawed at him, and the questions surfaced again and again. How had he not seen her desperation? Had his pride been so immense that he failed to notice the woman he once loved, suffering right under his nose? By noon, he was in his office at Bennett Properties, a sleek high-rise in the heart of Boston's financial district. Floor 38 boasted an impressive panorama of the city skyline, a testament to Marcus's success, but the usual sense of satisfaction he felt looking out over his city had vanished. When he walked in, Henry Caldwell, a graying man in his mid-50s with sharp eyes and a tense manner, was waiting. "Marcus, we need to talk about the Henderson deal," Henry began, barely glancing up from a folder crammed with spreadsheets. "They're threatening to back out unless we show them more favorable terms." Marcus sank into the leather chair behind his desk. "We can adjust some figures, but I need to confirm how it affects our long-term finances." Henry paused, studying Marcus's weary face. "You look exhausted. Something on your mind?" Marcus hesitated. Despite the pressure building inside him, he wasn't ready to discuss Emma or the baby with Henry. "Just personal matters," he said curtly. "Let's focus on the Henderson files." Henry nodded, flipping pages and outlining potential solutions. Marcus tried to concentrate, but his mind drifted to Emma. How was she today? Was the baby healthy? Had she found any better living arrangement? The image of that cramped nursery at the shelter haunted him, fueling his regret. After half an hour of aimless discussion, Henry frowned. "Are you sure you're all right? You haven't contributed much to this strategy. Normally, you'd have a dozen ideas already." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I'm just going through a lot." He exhaled sharply, feeling a pang of vulnerability he rarely allowed himself. "Henry, do me a favor and handle the Henderson situation as you see fit. I trust your judgment. We'll finalize at the next board meeting." Henry's eyebrows rose in concern, but he closed the folder and stood. "If that's what you want. But remember, the board expects a hands-on approach from you. Don't let them question your leadership." With that, he left, leaving Marcus alone in the quiet hum of the office. Marcus stared at his desk, a testament to his power, stacked with deals and portfolios worth millions. Yet none of it felt meaningful at that moment. His gaze drifted to a framed photo on the corner, he and Emma, taken at a charity gala 2 years ago. She wore a stunning emerald gown, her smile radiant. He looked proud, almost arrogant, with an arm possessively around her waist. He remembered that night how she joked about wanting to slip out early and get milkshakes instead of champagne, and how he had laughed, promising they would. But he got caught up in conversations about business expansions, and they never did leave early. It was a small moment that summed up their entire marriage. Emma's simple desires overshadowed by his relentless ambition. Determined to escape the suffocating guilt, he grabbed his coat and instructed his assistant to cancel his remaining appointments. He drove aimlessly around Boston, passing the manicured lawns of Beacon Hill and the bustling shops of Newbury Street. Somehow, he ended up near the shelter again, idling in his car outside its nondescript exterior. His stomach twisted in knots. He wanted to go in, to see Emma, to hold his son, if the baby would even let him. But he doubted Emma would welcome him with open arms. A rap on his window startled him. It was a young volunteer from the shelter, a teenage boy wearing a puffy coat. Marcus rolled down the window. "You need help, sir?" the boy asked, peering into the luxurious interior of the car. "We got free soup inside if you're hungry." Marcus forced a thin smile. "No, thank you. I'm fine." The boy nodded politely and walked away. He remained there a bit longer, watching men and women shuffle in and out of the shelter, each face etched with hardship. It struck him how close Emma was to these realities, while he had lived in isolation in his penthouse. His own ex-wife and newborn child were taking solace under this roof, and he had done nothing to protect them. The realization stung like a raw wound. Eventually, he drove off, the sounds of the city swirling around him like a distant echo. He wanted to push away the creeping despair, but it clung to him. There was no simple fix. No strategic negotiation could undo a year's worth of pain and betrayal, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly helpless, running from an emotion he couldn't outrun. Night fell early in Boston, as Marcus sat alone in his penthouse, the dimmed lights reflecting off polished surfaces. He was on his second glass of whiskey, a habit he rarely indulged, but the tension inside him needed some form of release. Each sip burned his throat, matching the fire of regret that smoldered in his chest. He flipped through channels on the large television mindlessly. The local news flickered on, showing a brief report about an upcoming charity banquet hosted by the Bennett Foundation. Marcus stared blankly until his phone buzzed, breaking the silence. The caller ID displayed Dad. He clenched his jaw, reluctant to answer. Richard Bennett, 72, had long since retired and rarely called unless he had something to say about the family business or to critique Marcus's decisions. With a resigned sigh, Marcus picked up. "Marcus, I've been trying to reach you," came his father's measured voice. "Henry tells me you've been distracted." Marcus exhaled. I've had some personal matters come up. I'm handling it. Richard's tone turned sharp. This family didn't build an empire on excuses. If something's interfering with your work, fix it. We can't afford for you to lose focus. Memories of his father's stern lectures washed over him. For Richard, business always came first. Emotional baggage was a distraction for lesser men, not for those meant to lead a corporation. Marcus bristled. I'm aware of my responsibilities. I haven't neglected them. An exasperated sigh crackled through the line. The board meeting is next week. We'll have potential investors there. Don't let your personal drama ruin our prospects. With that, Richard ended the call. Marcus set his phone aside, a bitter taste in his mouth. The conversation with his father stirred up old frustrations and a renewed sense of guilt. He paced the living room, occasionally peering through the glass walls at the city lights blinking below, each flicker reminding him there was a world outside his silent fortress. He downed the last of his drink, then forced himself to stop. Another glass wouldn't fix anything. He decided he needed to talk to someone who wasn't entangled in his world of suits and profits. Grace Sullivan came to mind, the shelter's director, whose kind eyes seemed to see right through his defenses. He dialed the shelter's main number, half expecting no one to pick up at that hour. A soft, familiar voice answered. Dorchester Community Shelter, Grace speaking. Grace, it's Marcus Bennett, he said quietly. I hope it's not too late to call. Her tone was calm. Not at all. Are you all right, Mr. Bennett? He paused, grappling with his words. I'm not sure. I wanted to apologize for earlier, for my reaction, and He didn't know how to continue. I need advice about Emma, about the baby, about everything. Grace's voice remained steady. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I can listen. I'll be at the shelter early tomorrow if you want to drop by. Early the next morning, Marcus found himself on the shelter's doorstep again. The winter sky was still a soft grey, and volunteers were just beginning to set up for breakfast service. Inside, the warm air smelled of coffee and oatmeal. He spotted Grace in a corner, stacking bowls. She motioned for him to follow her to a small, quiet office. He hesitated before sitting down, restlessly tapping his fingers on the edge of the desk. Grace sat across from him, folding her hands. Tell me what's on your mind. He took a breath. I hurt Emma deeply. I let my pride and anger drive her away. Now she's here with my son. I want to help, but she doesn't trust me, and honestly, I can't blame her. He looked down at his hands, remembering how he'd demanded a divorce when all she wanted was his understanding. I don't know where to begin. Grace listened intently. The first step is to acknowledge what you did, then be patient. Show Emma you've changed through actions, not just words. She's been through a harrowing experience. Trust is not something she'll hand over easily. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words. She's already so closed off. She won't accept my money, my help, nothing. It's like she'd rather be in this shelter than take anything from me. Grace offered a small, sympathetic smile. To Emma, accepting help from you might feel like surrendering her independence, or admitting she's still vulnerable to you. She's protecting her heart and her baby. He swallowed, recalling the fear in Emma's eyes. I want to fix everything right now. The business side of me thinks I can just fund a solution, but clearly that won't solve the emotional damage. A gentle nod from Grace. Money can't buy back trust or erase betrayal. It's about proving day by day that you're worthy of her faith again. Marcus stared at the chipped paint on the wall. In his world, he was used to quick negotiations and immediate results. Here, in this realm of broken families and fragile hopes, progress couldn't be purchased, only earned. Grace rose, placing a hand on his shoulder. Give it time, and if you truly care, don't give up. He thanked her and walked out, the hum of the shelter filling his ears. At the end of the hallway, he caught a glimpse of Emma entering the nursery. She didn't see him, but that fleeting moment was enough to rekindle his resolve. He realized that this was going to be the hardest negotiation of his life, one that involved his heart, not his wallet. Marcus approached the shelter's nursery with a nervous flutter in his chest. He could hear the quiet sounds of women chatting, babies fussing, and occasional laughter that broke the hush. He didn't see Emma at first, but then he noticed her in the far corner, carefully changing Oliver's diaper. She looked tired, hair tied up in a messy bun, shadows under her eyes revealing sleepless nights. He drew a breath, gathering his courage, and walked up slowly. Emma glanced over her shoulder. For a moment, a flicker of hurt crossed her face. She tightened her lips, focusing on the baby. If you're here to lecture me about leaving last night without saying more, don't bother. Marcus held his hands up in a gesture of peace. That's not why I'm here. I just want to see if Oliver needs anything. Diapers, formula, clothes, whatever. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. He's running low on diapers, but I can figure it out. She finished dressing Oliver, then lifted him gently, pressing her cheek against his fuzzy head. The baby whimpered, then settled, eyes half-lidded as he prepared for a nap. Marcus found himself smiling at Oliver, a sweet ache blooming in his chest. At least let me bring some diapers to the shelter, he offered quietly. Not to throw money at the problem, but just to help. I can pick up some supplies on my way here next time. Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to Oliver. Fine, she conceded, voice tentative. But don't make it seem like I owe you anything. He nodded, swallowing a lump of relief. I promise. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. A few other mothers in the nursery looked on, curious about the well-dressed man talking to Emma. One of them, a friendly-faced woman named Charlene, gave a small wave to Marcus, and he offered a polite nod back. Despite his discomfort, he felt a strange sense of belonging, as if he were taking his first steps into a world he had long avoided. He cleared his throat. Emma, I don't want to push, but would it be all right if I held him for a moment? She studied him for a few seconds. Then, with visible reluctance, she extended Oliver into his arms. Marcus cradled the infant carefully, as though holding something fragile. The baby squirmed, tiny fists flailing, but then settled against Marcus's chest. A wave of emotions crashed over Marcus, a mixture of awe, guilt, protectiveness, and sorrow for all the months he'd missed. He could feel the baby's warmth, hear the soft exhales, see the delicate eyelashes fluttering. Hi there, little guy, he whispered, voice thick. I'm your... The word father almost caught in his throat. He wondered if he had the right to say it, given he'd been absent, yet the undeniable truth was in his arms. Emma observed him with cautious eyes, as if ready to snatch the child away at the first sign of danger. After a few moments, Oliver drifted into a light doze. Marcus carefully handed him back to Emma, who placed him in a makeshift crib. She turned to Marcus, crossing her arms. I'm only letting you do this because I won't deprive Oliver of knowing his father. But don't get your hopes up about us. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. I understand, and thank you. She nodded, her guard still firmly in place. I have a medical follow-up next week for Oliver. He was premature, so the doctors want to check his weight, lungs, everything. If you'd like to come, I'd like that very much, Marcus said, heart lifting. Emma gave him a quick, searching look. Don't be late. It's Monday morning, 9 o'clock, at the Freeport Clinic, room 204. She wrote the details on a scrap of paper and handed it to him. If you really intend to help, show up. He took the paper with unsteady fingers, as if holding a fragile truce. I will. They fell silent for a moment, both unsure how to proceed. He noticed the tension in her shoulders and realized she was bracing herself for disappointment. He wanted to reassure her, but words felt insufficient. Instead, he slowly backed away, giving her space, hoping she'd see that he could respect her boundaries. Outside the nursery, he saw Grace approach, arching an eyebrow inquisitively. Marcus offered a small smile. She agreed to let me help with supplies, and I can go to Oliver's next checkup. It sounded like a small victory, but to him, it was monumental. Grace placed a hand on his arm. Patience, Mr. Bennett. It's a long road to rebuild what was lost. He exhaled, glancing back through the glass window. Emma was sitting on a chair by the crib, gently stroking Oliver's cheek. Her face held equal measures of love and fatigue. Yet for the first time, Marcus felt a faint spark of hope that this fractured family could find a way forward. The uncertainty still loomed, as did the weight of the past, but he walked away determined to take each step carefully, no matter how shaky the ground might be. He left the shelter, gripping the scrap of paper with the clinic appointment as if it were a lifeline. In many ways it was. Marcus arrived at the Dorchester Community Shelter on a chilly Saturday morning, balancing 2 large boxes of diapers and infant supplies in his arms. He spotted Grace Sullivan in the main lobby, directing volunteers. Immediately, she gave him a warm smile, her gaze flicking to the boxes he carried. He recognized that kind, knowing look, an unspoken gratitude for following through on his promise to Emma. "Let me help," Grace offered, ushering Marcus toward the nursery. "She's in there with Oliver." He set the boxes down by the door, feeling a slight surge of relief that he'd completed at least one tangible gesture. "I couldn't find the exact brand she asked for, but these should work for now," Grace nodded. "It's not just about the brand, it's about showing up. You did." They walked into the nursery, where a few mothers quietly tended to their children. Emma sat in a corner, rocking Oliver, who looked more alert than before, his small eyes scanning the room. Emma noticed Marcus immediately and stood, though her posture remained guarded. He tried a smile as he lifted one of the boxes. "I brought what I promised." She glanced at the supplies, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. "Thanks." Her tone was clipped, but not hostile. Grace cleared her throat softly. "Emma, do you mind if Marcus and I step out for a quick chat in my office? I want to go over some additional ways he can help." Emma shrugged, adjusting Oliver in her arms. "That's fine." Outside the nursery, Grace led Marcus to her small, cluttered office. The window overlooked a courtyard where a few residents milled about. Closing the door, she offered him a seat. "I know you've been trying to do right by Emma," she began, leaning on the edge of the desk, "and I've seen genuine effort from you, but I think she needs more than material help. She needs to know she's safe, emotionally." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to show her I've changed, but she barely lets me say more than a few words. Every time I see that look in her eyes, it's like she's bracing for impact." Grace's warm expression turned serious. "Emma confided in me a bit. She mentioned how she'd discovered her pregnancy the day your divorce talk began. She felt cornered, worried you'd assume she was manipulating you with a sudden announcement. It's a lot of trauma piled on top of an already failing marriage." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should have listened back then. Instead, I just ended everything. I can't change the past. But maybe there's a way to ease her fears now." Grace gave a small nod. "Patience and honesty. Keep showing up. Apologize if you need to, even if it's for the 10th time. People who've been hurt deeply sometimes need reassurance over and over until it sinks in." Marcus looked at her, absorbing her words. He wondered if Grace recognized her role as a mentor of sorts in his life. She didn't have fancy degrees in negotiation or psychology, though he suspected she might have more training than she let on. But she possessed a calm wisdom gleaned from years of service at the shelter. In that moment, he realized how valuable her guidance was. He caught sight of a diploma on the wall. Grace had a degree in social work from a local university, so she did have formal training after all. "You're quite something," he said, with a faint smile. She laughed lightly. "I've seen enough heartbreak in this line of work to recognize when people are on the brink of change. I can tell you're serious about repairing things. Just remember that relationships don't heal overnight." Marcus stood up. "Thank you," he said, offering a handshake. "I mean it." Grace took his hand in a firm but reassuring grip. "Show Emma, not me. Now, go spend some time with your son before you leave." Stepping back into the hallway, Marcus spotted Emma chatting quietly with another resident named Charlene, the same woman who had given him a friendly wave days before. Emma noticed him approach, and Charlene excused herself, leaving them alone beside a bulletin board announcing job fairs and counseling sessions. He studied Emma for a moment. "Grace suggested I stay a bit longer to help around here, if that's okay with you." Emma hesitated. "The more hands, the better, I guess. Several volunteers called in sick today." They ended up in the makeshift kitchen, ladling out bowls of chicken soup for lunch. Marcus rolled up his shirt sleeves, carefully serving portions under Emma's watchful eyes. At one point, Emma handed him a roll of paper towels, and their fingers brushed. He caught her glance, noticing the faint flush on her cheeks. She quickly looked away, but not before he sensed the undercurrent of tension mixed with something else. Uncertainty, maybe. When they finished, Emma wiped her hands on her jeans. "Thank you for pitching in." "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he said softly. "I know this doesn't fix anything between us, but I hope it shows I'm trying." She shrugged, a defensive mechanism that he recognized. "I'll see you Monday at Oliver's checkup." Her expression hinted at lingering apprehension, but she didn't reject him entirely. He nodded, taking that small opening as encouragement. "I'll be there. Early." Though the conversation ended on a cautious note, Marcus left the shelter feeling a bit lighter. Grace's words echoed in his mind, patience and honesty. He realized that in this new territory of fatherhood and making amends, he wasn't the powerful negotiator controlling all the chips. He was simply a man seeking a second chance, guided by a steady hand that reminded him there was more to life than sealing the perfect deal. Early Monday morning arrived, cold and bright. Marcus parked his car outside the Freeport clinic, determined not to miss Oliver's medical appointment. He got out, checking his watch. 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes to spare. Good. He had promised Emma he'd be there early, and for once he wanted to be a man of his word without fail. Inside, the clinic's waiting area was unassuming, grey chairs, a few faded health posters, and a receptionist with a kind smile. Emma was already there, rocking Oliver's car seat gently with her foot. She looked up, and a flicker of surprise crossed her face. "You're early." He tucked his hands in his pockets. "I wanted to make sure I didn't keep you waiting." Emma nodded, adjusting the blanket around Oliver's tiny form. "He's been fussy this morning. Probably just a little indigestion." They sat side by side in an awkward silence. The overhead speaker announced patient names, and a nurse occasionally popped out from a side door to call someone in. Marcus glanced at Emma, noticing the faint circles under her eyes. "You look tired," he observed gently. She sighed. "I am. Oliver still wakes up every 2 hours at night. He's gaining weight, but still needs close monitoring." A nurse in cheerful scrubs approached, holding a clipboard. "Emma, we're ready for you." She led them into a small examination room, plastered with pictures of cartoon animals and an alphabet border. The setting felt surreal to Marcus. He'd negotiated massive real estate deals in grand offices, but never felt so nervous stepping into a simple clinic room. Dr. Michael Hughes, a genial pediatrician with silver-streaked hair, introduced himself. "Emma, nice to see you again," he said, offering Marcus a polite nod. "And you must be Oliver's father." Marcus's throat tightened at the word father. He managed a quiet yes, uncertain if Emma would confirm it. But she gave a slight nod, her gaze flicking to him for a second. Dr. Hughes ran through standard checks. Length, weight, reflexes. Oliver fussed, but soon his cries were replaced by soft whimpers. "His progress is on track," the doctor announced, peering at a chart. "He was born premature, but these numbers look better each visit. Keep following the feeding schedule. If he continues like this, we can ease up on some precautions in a few months." Relief spread across Emma's face, and even Marcus felt a wave of gratitude. He wanted to celebrate, but the reality of their strained relationship kept him measured. "Thank you, Doctor," he said. Dr. Hughes offered a comforting smile. "Emma, I'd like you to meet with our clinic's social worker just to ensure you have all the support you need. And, sir," he glanced at Marcus, "if you're able, you might want to consider a more stable living environment for Oliver. A shelter can only do so much." Emma tensed, but Marcus took a breath. "We'll, figure something out," he said, casting a sidelong look at her. She didn't contradict him, so he took it as a small allowance. After the exam, they stepped into the hallway. Marcus lingered, searching Emma's face. "He's doing great. I'm glad." She shifted the car seat from one hand to the other. "He's tough. I guess he had to be." As they headed for the exit, the social worker, Dr. Hughes, mentioned Patricia, a friendly woman with a firm handshake, introduced herself. "Emma, do you have a moment to discuss some housing programs?" Emma hesitated. Marcus could see the conflict warring in her eyes. She glanced at him, then nodded. They followed Patricia into a cramped office. Patricia explained a transitional housing program for new mothers, which offered more privacy than a shelter. "We have limited spaces, but you could get on the waiting list. And if Oliver's father can provide any financial backing, we might expedite the process." Emma stiffened, eyes dropping to the floor. Marcus wanted to speak up, to say he'd do whatever it took, but he sensed Emma's reluctance. She didn't want to appear indebted to him. He finally spoke anyway. "I'm more than willing to help." Patricia continued carefully. "This would be in Emma's name. We don't need co-signers or anything. We just ask if there's any financial assistance possible for living expenses." Emma crossed her arms, but she nodded slowly. "Let me think about it." They left the clinic in tense silence. Outside, the sky was bright, and the winter chill nipped at their faces. Marcus looked at Emma, who was adjusting Oliver's blanket. "If you want me to, I could help with the security deposit. It would at least get you two into a safer place." She swallowed. "I'll let you know. I'm not making any promises." He gently placed a hand on the car seat, feeling Oliver's small presence. "I just want him to have a stable start in life. I don't expect anything in return." Emma lifted her gaze, eyes reflecting exhaustion and guarded hope. "I appreciate that," she said, voice trembling slightly before she turned away, heading toward a bus stop. Marcus stood there, hands in his coat pockets, watching as she carefully secured Oliver and then boarded the bus. He felt a pang of worry, seeing them leave without a car, without the warmth he could easily provide. He had never felt so conflicted, torn between wanting to rescue them immediately and respecting Emma's right to choose. Standing on that sidewalk, with the city bustling around him, Marcus understood he was crossing into unfamiliar territory, and there would be no return to the controlled, polished life he once knew. The next day, Marcus found himself at the shelter once again, balancing a box of groceries in one arm and a couple of soft blankets in the other. He had begun to feel strangely at home in the worn hallways and modest rooms, though he never would have imagined such a scenario a year ago. As he navigated the corridor, he overheard the murmur of mothers exchanging tips on baby care and budgeting. He felt like an outsider, peering into a world governed by realities far removed from corporate balance sheets. Yet, in this environment, he sensed a sort of communal bond he rarely encountered in boardrooms. Emma was talking quietly with Charlene in the lobby. They were seated on a battered couch near a corner lamp whose shade had seen better days. Emma spotted Marcus first. She gave him a curt nod, and he took it as an invitation to approach. Charlene greeted him with a friendly smile. "Hey, Marcus, Emma was telling me about Oliver's checkup. Sounds like the little guy's improving?" Emma's posture relaxed slightly. "Yes, Doctor." "Hughes said he's on track." Marcus felt genuine relief. "I'm glad to hear that." Charlene stood, brushing invisible lint from her sweatpants. "I'll give you two some space." She patted Emma's shoulder reassuringly, then left. Silence fell. Marcus shifted the blankets in his arms. "I brought these for Oliver, in case it gets colder. And, well, some groceries for the shelter, mostly fresh produce." He gestured to the box at his feet. Emma's gaze flicked to the blankets. She inhaled slowly. "You didn't have to, but thank you." Encouraged, he set the box down by the wall, then carefully draped one of the blankets over the back of the couch. "I was thinking," he began, voice uncertain, "about the housing program. If you're interested, I could help you sign up. Grace mentioned she has contacts that could speed up the process." Emma's eyes clouded. "Maybe. But I'm trying to figure out if it's the right time. She hesitated, gaze drifting to the floor. "I don't want to rely on anyone." Marcus gently cleared his throat. "I understand. But maybe it's not about relying, it's about accepting help for Oliver's sake." She folded her arms, protecting herself from the vulnerability that came with needing help. "Let me think on it, okay?" He nodded, choosing not to push further. "Of course." Before he could say more, a commotion arose at the shelter's entrance. A tall man in a threadbare jacket stomped in, loudly complaining about his missing belongings. The tension rippled through the lobby. Grace hurried over to calm the situation. Emma watched, biting her lip anxiously. "This place can get hectic," she murmured, cradling her own elbow. "Not exactly ideal for a newborn." Marcus followed her gaze. "No," he admitted softly. "But it's good there's a roof and people who care." They both fell silent, acknowledging the instability of the environment. It was a stark contrast to the sanitized corridors of corporate life or the polished floors of a penthouse. Here, every day was raw, unpredictable, and yet somehow more honest than the carefully curated world Marcus was used to. After the ruckus settled, Emma stood. "I think I'll check on Oliver in the nursery. I left him napping." "Would you like to come?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the invitation. "Yes, sure," he said, warmth blooming in his chest. Together, they walked through the hallway toward the nursery. Paintings made by volunteer art students hung on the walls, adding a burst of color to the otherwise utilitarian space. In the nursery, Oliver dozed in a small crib. Emma gently ran a finger over his cheek, her expression tender. Marcus found himself smiling, struck by how motherhood had softened her edges, even amid hardship. A volunteer handed Emma a small bottle of formula, and she sat down to feed Oliver when he stirred awake, fussing. Marcus hovered nearby, feeling a mixture of longing and timidity. "Mind if I—" Emma handed the bottle to him. "You can feed him," she said, her voice measured. "Just support his head." "He's still a bit wobbly." Marcus carefully cradled the baby and guided the bottle to his tiny mouth. The trust implied in that simple act made his heart pound. Emma watched closely, but there was no anger in her gaze. If anything, she looked cautious, yet appreciative. Seeing Oliver's small lips moving rhythmically against the bottle, Marcus felt a rush of protectiveness. This was far more profound than any contract he'd ever negotiated or property he'd ever acquired. He realized he was entering a kind of emotional territory he had never bothered exploring before. When Oliver finished, Emma gently took him back to burp him. Marcus sat there, breathless, as if he'd just completed some delicate, life-altering task. He couldn't help a faint laugh as Oliver let out a soft belch. Emma cracked a tiny smile, and for a fleeting moment they shared an unspoken bond over this simple, everyday parenting task. There were no grand speeches or sweeping reconciliations in that moment, just a quiet acknowledgement that they were stepping into a new landscape together. And though the environment was unfamiliar and filled with uncertainty, Marcus felt more alive than he had in years. Over the following weeks, Marcus developed a routine. He managed his real estate empire by morning, sometimes in person, sometimes via quick calls, then spent afternoons or evenings at the shelter. Each time he arrived, he saw new faces and heard new stories. Some residents came and went quickly, others stayed longer, weaving themselves into the fabric of the shelter's community. He started assisting with tasks he never thought he'd do, sorting donated clothes, serving food, cleaning up the dining area. Volunteering in this way gave him a perspective he'd sorely lacked. In a corner of the shelter, there was a wall with photos and brief success stories, people who had found stable housing or employment. He made a point of studying each picture, hoping Emma's face might one day grace that wall under happier circumstances. One afternoon, he found himself hauling boxes of canned goods into the storage room, sweat trickling down his temple despite the winter chill. Grace appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is a new side of you," she teased gently, "from the polished businessman to the volunteer in sweatpants." He chuckled, glancing down at his casual attire. "I figured it was time to dress for the work at hand. Suits get in the way of manual labor." Grace nodded toward the hallway. "Emma's taking Oliver to a short parenting workshop we're holding. Might be something you'd want to attend." Marcus considered it, heart speeding up at the chance to spend more time learning about Oliver. "Sounds good. Where is it?" "Room 112. Follow me." They walked down the corridor lined with children's art taped to the walls. Arriving at the small classroom, Grace nudged the door open. Inside, about half a dozen mothers and one father were seated in a semicircle, listening to Dr. Michael Hughes, who volunteered his time periodically, give tips on infant care and early childhood development. Emma glanced up when Marcus entered. She seemed surprised, but gestured for him to take an empty seat beside her. Dr. Hughes smiled in welcome. "Marcus, glad you could join us. We're discussing basic first aid techniques for babies." Marcus settled in, trying to appear confident, though he felt like a fish out of water. The doctor explained how to handle fevers, minor burns, choking hazards. Occasionally, participants asked questions. Emma mostly listened, her gaze moving protectively toward Oliver in his carrier near her feet. Marcus took notes on a borrowed notepad, determined not to forget anything. When the session ended, Dr. Hughes dismissed everyone but stopped Emma and Marcus. "I'm impressed you came," he said to Marcus. "Active fatherhood is a major factor in a child's early well-being." Marcus felt a flicker of pride, even as he remained painfully aware he'd missed the pregnancy and first weeks of Oliver's life. Emma looked away, perhaps recalling the same fact, but there was no open hostility in her stance. "Thank you," Marcus said simply, glancing at her. "I'm just trying to catch up, I guess." Dr. Hughes offered a reassuring nod. "Catching up still counts." After the workshop, Emma and Marcus wandered to the nursery. Oliver was awake, waving his tiny arms in excitement when Emma lifted him. Marcus reached out to brush the back of Oliver's hand with his finger. "He's stronger every day," Emma nodded. "The doctor said with enough nutrition and rest, he'll keep improving. He's got a follow-up in a few weeks to monitor his growth." Marcus bent closer, speaking softly to Oliver, who blinked curiously. "Hey, champ, you're looking good." He still felt a surge of wonder each time he gazed at his son, marveling at the small features that resembled Emma more than him. Emma observed him quietly. "You're different than I remember," she said eventually, her voice subdued, less focused on controlling everything. He smiled ruefully. "I guess I'm learning how much I don't know. This place has been teaching me a lot." She handed Oliver to him. For a moment, their eyes met, and he felt a subdued warmth. He supported Oliver's head, swaying gently. The baby's small hand tried to wrap around his thumb, and Marcus's heart melted. "I won't pretend I'm perfect," he told Emma, his tone earnest, "but I want to do better for both of you." Emma pressed her lips together, clearly still wrestling with her own uncertainties. However, she didn't pull back, and that felt like progress in itself. They stood together, side by side, in the comforting hum of the nursery, surrounded by soft lullabies from other mothers tending to their infants. In that moment, the corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations seemed a world away. He was immersed in an entirely different realm, where genuine connection and daily, humble acts mattered more than any business triumph. And for once, he didn't mind at all. On a crisp Friday evening, the shelter buzzed with energy. A volunteer group from a local church had come to cook dinner, turning the cafeteria into a hub of bustling activity. Pots clanged, laughter echoed, and the aroma of fresh bread and stew wafted through the halls. Marcus helped stack trays at the serving station when he noticed a man, around his mid-30s, stepping in with a backpack slung over one shoulder. The newcomer looked a bit lost, scanning the room uncertainly. Marcus approached with a welcoming gesture. "Hi, can I help you find something?" The man gave a tentative smile. Yeah, I'm Daryl Thompson. Someone told me I could talk to Grace Sullivan about a bed for the night." Marcus nodded, wiping his hands on a towel. "She's in the office down the hall. I can show you the way." They walked together, the warmth of the shelter's interior contrasting with the cold outside. On the way, Daryl explained his situation. He'd been laid off from a warehouse job, fallen behind on rent, and found himself evicted. Marcus listened intently, remembering how foreign these struggles had once seemed to him. Now, they felt closer to home. After directing Daryl to Grace, Marcus made his way back to the cafeteria, where Emma was trying to soothe an irritable Oliver. She looked up with a weary smile. "He's gassy again." "Might have to walk around with him for a bit," Marcus offered. "Want me to give it a shot?" She hesitated but handed Oliver over. He began pacing gently across the room, bouncing the baby in his arms. Surprisingly, Oliver quieted, letting out a tiny hiccup. "That's new," Emma murmured, an amused lift of her brows. "He's usually not so calm with anyone else." Pride swelled in Marcus's chest. "Maybe I just got lucky this time." Meanwhile, Daryl re-entered the cafeteria, now looking more relieved. He noticed Marcus holding Oliver and approached. "So, I hear you volunteer here." "Sort of," Marcus said, shrugging. "I help out when I can." Daryl paused, eyes flicking to Emma. "I heard you're a big shot real estate guy. Bennett Properties, right?" His tone was curious rather than accusatory. Marcus nodded. "That's me. Then why are you here?" Daryl asked, not rudely but with genuine puzzlement. "No offense, but shelters aren't exactly where most rich folks spend their free time." Emma looked up, equally intrigued by Marcus's answer. Marcus gently patted Oliver's back, thinking carefully. I guess you could say I discovered something more important than my usual routine. Darrell gave a half smile. Must be a story there. Anyway, thanks for showing me around. I appreciate it. They parted ways, but the exchange left Marcus pondering. He realized that the people he was meeting here, mothers like Charlene, men like Darrell, shared one common thread. Life had taken unexpected turns, and they were doing their best to cope. The difference was that Marcus had the means to return to his penthouse each night, while the others remained behind. Later that evening, as the dinner rush wound down, Marcus helped wipe the tables. Emma rejoined him after putting Oliver to sleep in the nursery. Darrell seems nice, she remarked. He's quiet, but he helped me carry some boxes to the storage room. Marcus agreed. He's looking for work. I might see if I can connect him with someone I know. Maybe that warehouse on the south side is hiring. He found himself wanting to help Darrell, just as he wanted to support everyone here who was trying to get back on their feet. Emma nodded. That would be good. It's tough for folks who've lost everything so fast. They continued cleaning up in companionable silence. While they worked, a sense of camaraderie emerged, an understanding that they were both trying to help those around them, in part because it felt right, and perhaps also as a way to heal their own wounds. At some point, Charlene approached, jokingly asking Marcus to reach a high shelf to store some extra plates. He obliged, the mundane action making him grin. He liked that the residents had begun to trust him enough to ask for help without hesitation. In the corner of his eye, he saw Emma watching. Her expression was softer than it had been in months. It dawned on him that these daily, shared tasks, mundane as they were forging a small bridge between them. Allies were not only found in corporate alliances, but in the slow, day-by-day building of trust with those who had every reason to doubt him. Before leaving for the night, Marcus peeked into the nursery. Oliver slept soundly, cheeks rosy in the soft glow of a nightlight. Emma stood beside the crib, arms folded. She turned when he approached. "He's peaceful now," she whispered. Marcus nodded, feeling a tender ache in his chest. Let's hope he stays that way. Though they exchanged no grand declarations, the warmth in Emma's eyes was enough. He felt more like a partner than he ever had, even when they were married. He understood that while their journey was far from complete, they were no longer walking it alone. There were others, both inside and outside the shelter, who shared in their struggles, offered support, and became allies in unlikely places. Marcus was finishing up a routine check at the office one morning, scrolling through financial reports in his private conference room, when his CFO, Henry Caldwell, strode in unannounced. Henry's usually calm demeanor was replaced by tight lips and narrowed eyes. "Marcus, we need to talk now," he said, voice low but urgent. Marcus glanced up. "Sure. Take a seat. What's going on?" Instead of sitting, Henry tossed a folder onto the table. "I've been hearing rumors. Investors suspect you're shifting company resources to personal charitable projects. That might not be a problem if we had everything in writing and above board, but the board is uneasy. They think you're distracted." Marcus frowned, flipping through the folder. It contained printouts of emails referencing expansions in philanthropy, along with snide remarks from a few board members questioning Marcus's priorities. He felt a spark of annoyance. "Henry, you know I'm still fulfilling all my responsibilities. Philanthropy is part of Bennett Properties' public image." Henry's jaw clenched. "But the board perceives you're neglecting key deals, like the Henderson negotiation. They're threatening to withdraw if they sense instability at the top." Marcus pushed the folder aside. "I'm not neglecting anything. I've been handling the Henderson deal on schedule." Henry leaned over the table, voice taut. "Then prove it. Show up at the board meeting next week with a detailed plan. Reassure them your focus is still on corporate growth, not just the shelter. Anger flared inside Marcus, but he kept his tone measured. I can handle my personal commitments and run this company at the same time. Henry exhaled, lowering his voice. Look, this is about perception. You've always been the rock of Bennett Properties, driven, decisive. Lately, you're vanishing for hours, sometimes half a day, and no one knows where you are. They see you carrying diapers around for God's sake. They're starting to question if you're losing your edge. Marcus stood, pushing back his chair. Those personal errands are my business. The board isn't entitled to every detail of my life. Henry took a step back, but his eyes remained stern. I'm just warning you. Don't let them think you're going soft. We built a reputation on being ruthless competitors. Investors trust that. Marcus's face hardened. If being soft means caring about people who need help, then maybe my reputation could use a change. A charged silence filled the room. Henry pursed his lips, then straightened. Just make sure your sudden philanthropic streak doesn't cost us critical investments, or you might find the board has other ideas about leadership. Understand? Without waiting for a response, he walked out, leaving Marcus seething. After a moment, Marcus sank back into his chair, staring at the open folder of emails. He realized he was at a crossroads. Either bow to the board's expectations or stay the course he'd chosen. The stakes had never felt so high. Later that day, as if on cue, Emma called, her tone hesitant but urgent. Oliver's been crying on and off. I think he has colic. I might need a ride to the pediatrician later if they can fit me in. I can't seem to soothe him, and the shelter's short on volunteers who can watch him if I go alone. Marcus felt a pang, recalling Henry's warning, but the decision was simple. Of course, he said without hesitation. I'll come right away. He cleared his schedule, ignoring the uneasy weight of Henry's threats. Within an hour, he arrived at the shelter and found Emma pacing the hallway, trying to calm a wailing Oliver. I'm so sorry, she whispered, looking frazzled. I know you're busy. He gently stroked Oliver's back. He's more important. Let's get him checked out. On the drive to the pediatrician, Oliver's cries filled the car. Emma tried to soothe him, voice trembling with stress. Thank you for dropping everything. Marcus shook his head. This is what matters. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and lingering guilt. He could sense she didn't want to disrupt his life, yet she had nowhere else to turn. At the clinic, Oliver's pediatrician confirmed colic and recommended some strategies. Gentle swaying, changes in formula, possible medication if symptoms persisted. Emma looked relieved to have some direction, though she was visibly exhausted. As Marcus drove her back to the shelter, Emma sighed. I hate that I have to call you like this, but I'm running out of options. Marcus turned the corner toward the shelter's street. You never have to apologize for needing help with our son. That's what I'm here for. She gave him a long, searching look before turning her eyes back to Oliver. In that moment, Marcus sensed the weight of her trust and how easily it could be broken if he turned his back again. When they arrived, Emma cradled Oliver protectively. Thank you, she murmured. I'll let you know if anything changes. Marcus nodded, his heart brimming with concern. Even after Emma disappeared behind the shelter doors, he remained parked there, reflecting on Henry's warning. Corporate demands clashed with the realization that he needed to be there for Emma and Oliver. The tension mounted, a storm brewing just beneath the surface, and he knew he would soon have to make a defining choice about where his true loyalties lay. Marcus arrived at the office early, hoping to get a head start on the mounting pile of paperwork. The tension from Henry's warning still weighed on him, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate tasks, finalizing the Henderson deal, reviewing investment proposals, and prepping for a roundtable with potential financiers. Yet, as he scrolled through the reports, he couldn't shake the image of Emma pacing with a crying Oliver in her arms. By 10 o'clock, he found himself peeking at his phone for messages from the shelter. None. The partial relief he felt soon gave way to anxious thoughts. No news might mean Emma was handling Oliver's colic alone. Still, he had to push that concern aside for a moment and switch gears to business. Henry strode into the office, crisp in a charcoal suit, carrying a binder packed with documents. "The board expects a clear strategy at next week's meeting," he said without pleasantries. "We can't afford any more rumors about misallocated resources." Marcus pursed his lips. "Our philanthropy is above board, and I'm prepared to show that every cent is accounted for. Let's finalize the figures." They spent an hour going through spreadsheets line by line. Henry's tone was clipped, each remark a veiled test. Marcus maintained a calm front, but each time Henry questioned a figure, particularly any that hinted at charitable spending, Marcus felt his irritation surge. He reminded himself that he needed to keep the company stable, if only to maintain the financial power to help Emma and Oliver. Eventually, Henry closed the binder with a snap. "We'll present these numbers as proof of Bennett Properties' stable foundation. The Henderson people need to see unwavering commitment to profit, or they'll walk." Marcus nodded, exhaling. "We'll be ready." Henry eyed him. "You keep telling me you can juggle everything. I hope you're right. One misstep, and we could lose the entire deal, maybe more." Without waiting for a response, he turned and left. Alone again, Marcus rubbed his temples. He felt as though he were juggling delicate glass balls, each representing a vital piece of his life. One slip and everything would shatter. He couldn't deny that the stakes were rising. That afternoon, he drove to the shelter, scanning the lobby until he spotted Emma with Oliver. The baby was fussing, but not nearly as loudly as before. Emma looked worn out yet determined. "Any improvement?" Marcus asked, setting down a small bag of baby supplies he'd brought. She sighed, bouncing Oliver gently. "A bit. The new formula might be helping, but he still has bouts of crying. I'm taking it one day at a time." They found a quiet corner of the common area. Marcus offered to hold Oliver while Emma massaged her temples. He carefully cradled the baby, feeling a jolt of affection when Oliver relaxed against him. "Did you get any rest?" Emma let out a humorless laugh. "Not much. Babies don't take breaks for their mothers, apparently." Marcus's mind wandered to how relentless the corporate world could be, too, equally unwilling to give breaks. It struck him how Emma was facing her own series of tests, just as he wrestled with his, "I could stay here for a bit. Maybe watch Oliver so you can grab a nap." She hesitated, eyeing him. "You have a company to run." He shrugged. "The company will still be there. You look like you're on the edge." Her lips pressed together. Then she exhaled. "All right, just don't let him roll off anything. He's pretty squirmy." Marcus smiled faintly. "I promise." Emma led him to a small lounge area near the nursery, then disappeared to find a quiet spot to rest. Marcus carefully settled Oliver, rocking him gently in his arms. The baby's cries turned into soft coos as he drifted off. Despite the tension in his own life, Marcus felt oddly at peace holding his son. It was a moment of stillness he rarely allowed himself. He glanced around the shelter, noticing how the residents moved about with a sense of camaraderie. A woman named Margaret offered him a tired but kind smile as she picked up her own toddler. Nearby, Darrell was seated on a couch, going through job listings. Marcus made a mental note to speak with him about a possible lead he'd discovered that morning. The baby stirred, letting out a tiny whimper, and Marcus gently patted his back. A flood of tenderness and responsibility washed over him. Each day, Oliver grew stronger, and each day, Marcus felt his own defenses shifting, revealing a vulnerability he never knew he had. When Emma returned, eyes heavy from a short nap, she found Marcus still cradling Oliver. His phone, which lay on a nearby table, buzzed incessantly with notifications, calls from the office, texts from Henry, emails piling up. Marcus glanced at it, then back at the child in his arms. For the first time in his life, he let the phone keep buzzing, ignoring the demands. Emma watched him. "You're really risking a lot by being here so often, aren't you?" Marcus's gaze held steady. "I'd risk more by not being here." She looked at him for a long moment, a swirl of unspoken emotions evident in her eyes. Oliver let out a little sigh, drifting deeper into sleep. In the midst of that hush, Marcus recognized they were both taking separate tests, tests of resilience, love, and trust, and neither could afford to fail. 3 days later, Marcus pulled up to the curb of the shelter, parking his car outside as snow flurries drifted through the Boston sky. He had just wrapped up a tense meeting with the Henderson Group, who insisted on more restrictive terms for their partnership. Although irritated, he had held his composure, determined not to let personal frustrations impede his professional obligations. He felt drained, but there was an urgency buzzing in his mind. He'd just received a text from Emma asking if he could come by. She'd said she had something she needed to share. He headed inside, shaking off the chill, and searched for her among the small clusters of residents chatting over late afternoon coffee. Finally, he found her in a corner of the cafeteria, hunched over a table with her fingers laced together tightly. "Is everything all right?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. Oliver was tucked snugly in a baby carrier next to her chair, dozing quietly. Emma's gaze flicked to him, then away. "I think it's time I told you something about why I left so suddenly after the divorce. Aside from being pregnant," Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "It wasn't just fear that you'd accuse me of trapping you with a baby. There was more. I was worried about how your company might react, how the media might spin things, and maybe how your father would pressure me." Marcus's shoulders tensed. "My father?" Emma nodded, folding her arms protectively. "Right before the divorce papers were finalized, Richard invited me to his home. He offered me a sizable sum to walk away quietly, not to contest anything in court. He suggested it would be best for everyone. At first I refused. But I was desperate, trying to figure out how to manage a high-risk pregnancy. Eventually, I took part of the money for medical expenses, but then felt guilty, afraid he'd twist it into a story that I blackmailed you. So I disappeared. I didn't think anyone would believe me if I spoke out." Marcus's jaw clenched. He recalled how controlling his father could be in business matters, how the older man believed in doing whatever it took to keep the family's image untarnished. It wasn't a stretch to imagine him orchestrating a silent payoff to avoid a scandal. "I had no idea," he murmured, anger and sorrow mixing in his chest. Emma looked away, tears brimming. "I felt trapped. I didn't want you to think I used you. After the divorce, I found out my complications were worse than expected. The bills kept piling up, so I spent everything I had on treatments, including what your father gave me. And that's how I ended up here." Marcus reached for her hand, hesitating before making contact. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" She pulled her hand back gently but not harshly. "I'm not telling you this for pity. I just needed you to understand why I ran. I was scared of your father's power, your influence, and my own vulnerability." His mind raced with memories of half-heard conversations and hints of paternal involvement during the divorce proceedings. He felt fury at Richard's manipulation, but also guilt for his own blindness. "You have every right to be angry." Emma folded her arms again. I'm not sure what good anger does now. I can't keep secrets anymore, not when we're trying to figure out how to co-parent Oliver. He nodded, feeling a surge of protectiveness. I appreciate you telling me. I'll handle my father. But I want you to know that nobody's going to bully you again. She studied his face carefully. I don't want a war with your family. I just want stability for Oliver. Marcus exhaled. So do I. A silence followed, both of them processing. Finally, he ventured, would you consider finding a better place to live with Oliver? Away from the chaos here. Emma let out a slow breath. I'm on the waiting list for transitional housing, but it could be weeks, even months before a spot opens. He leaned forward, voice low. What if I got you an apartment? No strings attached, just so you two can be safe. Emma shook her head, though the temptation flickered in her eyes. I can't. I told you. I don't want to owe anyone. Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but he tamped it down. Pushing her would only reinforce her fears. I understand. Just know the offer stands. They heard a small cry from Oliver's carrier. Emma gently lifted him, soothing his fussing. Marcus touched the baby's tiny hand, feeling its warmth. He realized that his father's interference was just one more weight on a scale already strained with guilt and regret. Later that night, as he left the shelter, he stood under a street lamp with snow gathering on his shoulders, mind churning over Emma's confession. He couldn't ignore the sense of betrayal toward his father, nor could he pretend the company's demands would simply vanish. Everything felt precarious, as if all these tensions were converging into a single test of who he truly was, and how far he was willing to go to make things right. 3 days before the critical board meeting, Marcus found himself summoned to Richard Bennett's estate in Brookline. The old house, a sprawling colonial with pristine landscaping, was a far cry from the humble corridors of the shelter. He parked in the circular driveway, bracing himself. In the ornate foyer, an attendant took Marcus's coat and led him to a study lined with leather-bound books and expensive artwork. Richard stood by a fireplace, nursing a tumbler of scotch. At 72, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who expected the world to bow to him. "Marcus," he greeted, voice smooth, "I appreciate you coming on short notice." Marcus folded his arms. "You said it was urgent." Richard gestured to an armchair. "Sit. We have matters to discuss, specifically your recent distractions. Word is you've been spending a lot of time at that shelter. That's all well and good, but it's affecting the perception of Bennett Properties. The board is uneasy." Marcus remained standing. "I'm aware of the board's concerns, but there's no wrongdoing. All expenditures are transparent." Richard's gaze was cold. "The Henderson deal is on shaky ground. Your CFO tells me the potential investors might pull out. Our share price could plummet if the rumor mill claims the CEO has lost interest in corporate growth. Worse, if there's talk that family drama is overshadowing your judgment." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Family drama? Emma and Oliver are my family, and we're handling our personal affairs. It has nothing to do with the company." His father raised an eyebrow. "Everything is connected, son. You should know that by now. The press will dig up your ex-wife living in a shelter with your child. It could become quite the scandal, a scandal that might scare away investors." Marcus refused to back down. "The real scandal is that Emma was forced into dire circumstances because she felt cornered, and you didn't help." Richard scoffed. "I tried to help her. I gave her enough funds to solve her problems quietly, and she took it. Yet here she is, parading your illegitimate child around in public, drawing pity." Fury flashed across Marcus's face. "Oliver is not illegitimate, and Emma is doing her best. Don't you dare blame her for the situation we caused. And I didn't know you offered her money under the table." His father's nostrils flared. "That was business. You never questioned how easily she walked away." Marcus let out a slow, seething breath. "She was pregnant and terrified, and apparently she didn't trust me enough to confide. You certainly didn't give her a reason to stick around." Richard paused, swirling his scotch. "Regardless, we must contain this. You need to step away from that shelter and show the board that you're still fully committed to Bennett Properties. Make a donation if you must, but keep your personal entanglements out of the headlines." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. Part of him wanted to storm out, but a more controlled part recognized that giving in to anger wouldn't help Emma or Oliver. "You said you wanted what's best for the company, but you're forgetting I'm the one who built it up to its current status. I won't sacrifice my relationship with my child to placate shareholders." Richard set his glass down with a clink on the mantel. "Is that your final word? Because if you keep this up, the board might replace you. And don't think I won't support them if it comes to that. I've already spoken to Henry." Marcus's stomach clenched. Henry had been pressuring him lately, but would he truly side with Richard to push Marcus out? He exhaled, fists clenched at his sides. "You'd throw your own son under the bus." Richard's tone was icy. "Don't be naive. We can't afford your emotional detours. If you insist on playing house with Emma and the baby, do it discreetly. When you arrive at that board meeting, you will reassure everyone that your priorities are intact." Marcus steadied himself, rage and heartbreak battling in his chest. "I'll address the board, but I won't lie. I won't abandon Emma or Oliver. If that means the board wants me out, so be it." His father's eyes darkened. "You're making a grave mistake, Marcus." Without replying, Marcus turned on his heel and left the study. As he walked through the mansion's lavish halls, a sense of dread began coiling in his stomach. He had stood up to his father, but the repercussions loomed large. His position as CEO, his financial stability, everything he'd worked for was at stake. And if he lost it all, how could he continue to support Emma and Oliver? When he finally slipped behind the wheel of his car, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. In the quiet, he pictured Emma's tired eyes, Oliver's tiny face, and the bleak walls of the shelter. The thought of failing them made him feel ill. Yet he couldn't let Richard or the board dictate his personal life anymore. He started the engine, the tires crunching over the gravel driveway. The road ahead was murky and uncertain, and for the first time he realized just how formidable his father's opposition could be. Everything he valued, his family and the company he built, seemed to collide, threatening to tear him apart. 2 days later, Marcus found himself in a cluttered break room at the Dorchester Community Shelter, kneeling beside a broken cabinet hinge with a toolbox at his feet. Grace Sullivan had sheepishly asked if he could repair a few things around the place. He was relieved for the distraction, something physical, tangible, unlike the intangible battles he was fighting on the business front. As he unscrewed the damaged hinge, Darryl walked in carrying a stack of folding chairs. "Need a hand?" Marcus straightened. "Sure. Hold the door steady." While Darryl braced the cabinet door, Marcus reattached the hinge. "How's the job hunt going?" Darryl shrugged. "I got a lead at a warehouse. Might have an interview next week." "Thanks for the recommendation." "Happy to help," Marcus said, tightening the last screw. They finished up, and Darryl set the chairs aside. "So, rumor has it you're dealing with some serious pressure from your corporate side. You gonna be okay?" Marcus stood, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness from crouching on the floor. "I'm not sure, but I'll figure something out." Darryl nodded, pulling a worn jacket around himself. "Well, thanks for not forgetting us little folks." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Not at all." When Darryl headed off, Grace approached, beaming. Thank you for fixing that cabinet. It's been giving us trouble for months. He brushed off his jeans. No problem. I was happy to do something useful. Grace led him down the hall, where they passed the bulletin board brimming with notices for job training and parenting classes. She paused in front of it. I've been meaning to show you something. She pointed to a flyer for a benefit event, a Night of Hope, to be hosted at the shelter in 2 weeks. We're trying to raise money for expansions and more private rooms for families. Marcus examined the flyer, a swirl of bright graphics and heartfelt wording. That's great. Do you have any sponsors lined up? Grace sighed. A few local businesses, but we're aiming higher. I'd love for Bennett Properties to be a main sponsor, but I know you have plenty on your plate. He paused, recalling the board's accusations that he was mixing personal and corporate resources. Yet the cause was worthy, and the shelter desperately needed funding. I could try to help, maybe set it up so it's separate from the company's main budget, as a personal contribution, or from our charitable foundation. Let me see what I can do. Her eyes lit up. That would mean a lot. He smiled, but felt a prickle of unease. This was exactly the sort of involvement the board viewed with suspicion. Still, seeing the shelter's needs firsthand made the decision easy. He couldn't turn his back. As they walked toward the nursery, Marcus spotted Emma changing Oliver's diaper on a padded bench. The baby kicked excitedly when he saw Marcus, making a small gurgling sound that could almost be interpreted as delight. Emma shot him a tired smile. He's been much better today, hardly any crying fits. Marcus stepped closer, letting Oliver grip his finger. That's a relief. Emma finished adjusting the baby's outfit. I heard you fixed the cabinet hinge. He chuckled. Yeah, who knew I had a knack for shelter maintenance? She gently lifted Oliver into her arms. You're full of surprises lately. There was a soft warmth in her voice, and Marcus felt his heart swell. Speaking of surprises, he said, keeping his tone light, Grace told me about a fundraiser they're planning. I might sponsor it if that's okay with everyone. Emma's expression grew more serious. I appreciate your generosity, but won't that cause issues at your company? Henry might twist it into something negative. Marcus exhaled. Maybe, but I'll make sure it's legitimate and transparent. The shelter needs the help. She studied him. You're risking more than you let on, aren't you? He paused, carefully weighing how much to reveal. My father isn't happy that I'm prioritizing time here. The board is worried about rumors, but I won't let that stop me from supporting you and Oliver, or the shelter. Emma closed her eyes, a mix of gratitude and worry etched on her face. I never wanted you to lose your position. He gently touched Oliver's hand. I can find another position. I can't find another Oliver. The baby cooed as if amused by the statement. Emma's gaze flicked up to Marcus, and for a moment their eyes locked in an unspoken understanding. The road ahead was rocky, but in this small victory, spending time together, openly helping the shelter, they found a measure of hope. Just then, Grace called from the hallway, motioning Marcus over to discuss a fundraising detail. He excused himself, offering Emma a reassuring nod. As he followed Grace, he couldn't help but sense that while the obstacles remained formidable, they were forging a new path. One step, one repaired cabinet hinge, one baby's smile at a time. Marcus stepped out of his car onto a side street near the shelter, late afternoon light casting long shadows across the pavement. The board meeting was tomorrow and tension knotted his stomach. He planned to present a thorough report, defending both the financial stability of Bennett Properties and his philanthropic engagement. Yet a nagging voice inside him warned that Henry and Richard might be laying a trap. He made his way to the shelter, noticing clusters of residents chatting outside. Inside, a buzz of excitement filled the halls. Preparations for the upcoming fundraising event were underway. Colored streamers, donation boxes, and volunteer sign-up sheets were scattered around. The frenetic energy provided a welcome distraction from his looming corporate battle. Heading to the cafeteria, he spotted Emma helping Charlene set up a makeshift decorations table. Oliver was strapped to Emma's chest in a baby carrier, gazing at the activity with wide, curious eyes. Marcus felt a surge of warmth, seeing Emma so immersed in something hopeful, despite her current hardships. "Need an extra pair of hands?" he asked, nodding at the ribbons Charlene was struggling with. Charlene grinned. "Yes, please. Cut some of these for the table centerpieces." He grabbed a pair of scissors and began snipping ribbons into uniform lengths. Emma slipped a small smile his way. "You look restless," she observed. "Is everything okay?" Marcus forced a light chuckle. "Just a big day tomorrow. Board meeting could shape the future of the company." Charlene glanced between them, sensing the tension. "I'll leave you two for a moment," she murmured, stepping away with a handful of ribbons. Emma turned to Marcus, adjusting Oliver's carrier. "You're worried they'll vote you out, aren't you?" His chest tightened. "Henry's hinted at it, and my father's not exactly on my side right now. I've got data to show the company is thriving, but rumors can sway investors." Emma lowered her gaze to Oliver, who reached a tiny fist toward Marcus's shirt. "If that happens, how would you manage financially?" He hesitated, looking around to ensure no one overheard. "I've saved enough to stay comfortable for a while, but it'd be a big change. I'd have to consider a new venture or maybe a smaller firm." "It wouldn't be the end of the world, but—" He trailed off, feeling the weight of uncertainty. Emma exhaled. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." He set down the scissors, gently touching her arm. "I'm losing nothing by being there for my son. This is about choosing what really matters." Before she could respond, Grace walked over, her brow furrowed. "Marcus, can we speak in my office for a moment?" The urgency in her tone made him nod immediately. He followed her, weaving through volunteers prepping for the event. Once inside the cramped office, Grace shut the door behind them. "I got a phone call from someone claiming to be part of your company's legal department. They were asking about the shelter's funding, particularly your donations. They seemed suspicious, almost accusatory." Alarm prickled along Marcus's spine. "You're sure they said they were from Bennett Properties?" Grace nodded. "Yes, a woman named Lydia Morgan said she's your head of PR and had questions about how exactly your contributions are handled here." Marcus clenched his teeth. Lydia Morgan was indeed part of the PR team, a sharp and ambitious woman who often clashed with his more charitable impulses. "She didn't threaten anything, did she?" Grace shook her head, looking unsettled. "No, not explicitly, but she was probing. She asked if I had documentation, if any funds were in your personal name versus the foundation's. She also mentioned something about potential financial misrepresentation. I got the impression she was fishing for dirt." He rubbed his temple. "I'll talk to her. Don't worry, everything is above board. This is just internal politics." Grace studied him sadly. "I hate that your kindness is turning into a weapon for them." Marcus gave a tight nod. "So do I. But let me handle it." As he left her office, his phone buzzed. The screen displayed a text from Henry. "Urgent. We need to finalize slides. Call me now." Marcus stuffed the phone in his pocket, anxiety and resolve warring inside him. He passed by the cafeteria, catching Emma's eye. She looked at him with concern, and he gave her a reassuring smile, though it felt forced. He walked out of the shelter, each step more determined than the last, to confront whatever was brewing at Bennett Properties. Driving away, his mind spun with possibilities. Perhaps Lydia was gathering material to discredit him at the meeting, to paint him as mixing personal funds with corporate money. He clenched the steering wheel, adrenaline pushing him to prepare for the worst. He'd protect Emma and Oliver at all costs. If that meant stepping away from Bennett Properties, he'd do it. But he refused to let them tarnish the shelter's name or sabotage a community that had already suffered enough. As dusk settled over Boston, the skyline glowed with city lights, an ironic contrast to the shadows looming over his life. Tomorrow's board meeting would test his integrity, his loyalty, and maybe even his future with the company he'd poured his heart into. Yet somehow, in the swirl of worries, he felt a quiet steadiness, a sense that in choosing Emma and Oliver, he was finally standing on the side of what truly mattered. Marcus stepped into the gleaming conference room on the 38th floor of Bennett Properties, his heart thudding with the weight of impending confrontation. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Boston skyline, which was bathed in a stark winter light. The board of directors was already seated around a large oval table. On the far end, his father, Richard Bennett, sat with a composed yet severe expression. Henry Caldwell stood off to one side, flipping through a stack of papers with meticulous care. A hush settled over the room as Marcus placed his leather briefcase on the polished table. Usually, such gatherings were formal but predictable. Today, the atmosphere felt charged with tension, and the board members exchanged uncertain glances. Clearing his throat, Henry began, "Good morning, everyone. This extraordinary session has been called to discuss several pressing matters regarding Bennett Properties' financial direction and corporate leadership." Marcus surveyed the room. He recognized long-time supporters, like Sarah Ludlow, an older woman with shrewd blue eyes who had championed many of his projects. Others, such as Graham Pierce, a venture capitalist who thrived on aggressive expansion, looked openly doubtful. Marcus's father, silent, merely folded his hands as though awaiting a verdict already decided. Henry pressed a button on a remote, and a projector displayed charts on a wide screen. As CFO, he continued, "I have identified certain concerns about recent philanthropic expenditures. The board would like clarity on why these allocations were made through private channels instead of our usual corporate foundation." Marcus resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He knew the question was loaded. "I donated personally to the Dorchester Community Shelter to support urgent needs. Those funds were separate from our official foundation's budget." A small wave of murmurs swept the table. Graham spoke up, his voice a touch accusatory. "Marcus, are you suggesting you're channeling personal funds to causes outside the usual philanthropic structure? That can create confusion about our company's commitment to ROI." Marcus took a steadying breath. "I have the right to use my personal income as I see fit. None of this has compromised the company's stability. If anything, Bennett Properties' public image benefits when our CEO demonstrates genuine community engagement." Henry clicked to a new slide, a ledger with highlighted entries. "We have records indicating that some staff hours were billed to philanthropic work. That includes Mrs. Lydia Morgan's time, as she investigated our PR exposure related to your involvement with the shelter. This implies Bennett Properties paid employees to manage what may be your personal agenda." Marcus's pulse quickened. "If Lydia was investigating, it was without my directive. I have zero interest in turning the shelter into a publicity stunt. I told her to keep things low profile. Any misinterpretation is on her, not me." Across the table, Richard raised a hand, commanding silence. His tone was cool. "Son, the board is concerned about headlines painting the company as financially unstable or our leadership as distracted. The Henderson deal is fragile. Investors need reassurance." A spark of anger flared in Marcus's chest. "The Henderson Group is getting everything it was promised. No more, no less. Our quarterly profits are up, as I'll demonstrate." He opened his briefcase and distributed printed reports. "These figures confirm we've exceeded last quarter's target by nearly 5%. An undercurrent of nods and murmurs rippled around the table. Sarah Ludlow adjusted her glasses, studying the data. "This is impressive," she admitted, "though the rumors about your personal life remain a sticking point." Henry smoothed his tie. "Yes, we're not here to dispute the numbers, but to address the intangible risks. If your personal affairs become tabloid fodder, we lose the trust of high-profile partners." Marcus's thoughts flashed to Emma, Oliver, and the shelter's residents. "I won't deny my personal life has changed. I have a son, and I intend to be there for him. However, that does not affect my professional duties." Graham leaned forward, tapping a pen on the table. "We appreciate your candor, but the board needs a statement on how you plan to separate personal philanthropy from corporate resources. If we don't get that clarity, we may need to consider alternative leadership." A ripple of tension moved through the room. Marcus noticed Richard's impassive expression, a slight flicker in his eyes that suggested satisfaction at seeing his son cornered. Marcus inhaled, gathering the composure he'd honed over years of negotiation. "I'll clarify, starting immediately, any philanthropic venture I undertake for the Dorchester Community Shelter will use only my personal income. No staff will be assigned to it. My time at the shelter will be outside office hours." Henry raised an eyebrow. "And if the board deems that insufficient," Marcus met his gaze, "then the board is free to vote on my position. But I've done nothing unethical. Our profits are rising, and our expansions remain on track. I won't apologize for taking care of my own child or for helping a community in need." A moment of electric silence seized the room. Sarah cleared her throat. "We'll move forward with the financial review first, then revisit the leadership matter." "Agreed." The board members nodded. Henry's mouth thinned, and Richard's stare remained inscrutable. Marcus adjusted his tie, bracing for the meeting's next phase. He knew the true confrontation had only begun, and the outcome would define whether he could keep guiding Bennett Properties or risk losing everything he'd built for the sake of a life he was only just beginning to cherish. Marcus left the conference room hours later, shoulders sagging from the marathon session. Though no official decision had been made, the board demanded further investigations. Audits were ordered, both internal and external, aimed at confirming his claims about philanthropic spending. He felt a swirl of frustration and relief, frustrated by ongoing scrutiny, relieved that he wasn't immediately ousted. He rode the elevator down to the lobby, where Henry was waiting with arms crossed. "We still need you to finalize a formal statement for the press," Henry said in a curt tone. "And we have to prepare for Henderson's final review tomorrow." Marcus nodded, exhaustion lacing his voice. "I'll have a draft statement ready by tonight." Henry's gaze flicked toward the glass doors leading outside. "Don't take too long. We can't give the board anything else to worry about." Without another word, Henry disappeared among the polished marble pillars of the lobby. Marcus stepped through the doors, the chilly wind hitting his face as he headed to the parking garage. He felt oddly detached, as if floating between two worlds, one of cutthroat corporate politics and another of genuine human connection at the shelter. Standing by his car, he realized he wanted to ground himself somewhere that felt real, not manufactured by corporate anxieties. In minutes, he found himself driving toward the Dorchester Community Shelter. Dusk coated the city in soft orange light, and the roads were crowded with workers heading home. Upon arrival, Marcus spotted Emma in the parking lot, rocking Oliver in a lightweight stroller. She raised a hand in a tentative greeting. "You look drained," she observed quietly. "Long day?" He managed a tired smile. "That's an understatement. The board meeting was intense. Audits, possible leadership challenges. It's all in limbo." Emma's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "I wish there was something I could do." He shook his head. "You have your own worries. How's Oliver?" She glanced down at the baby, who was gurgling, wide-eyed at the sounds and sights of the busy lot. "He's doing all right. Still fusses, but not as badly as last week. I was just getting some air." They strolled together around the modest perimeter of the shelter's parking area. The twilight cast elongated shadows on the pavement. Despite the day's tension, Marcus found his breathing settling into a calmer rhythm. "How about you?" he asked gently. "Any news on the transitional housing waitlist?" Emma tugged the stroller handle, considering her words. "I might have a shot at a small studio in a women's residence next month. It's not guaranteed, but it's progress." He felt a surge of relief. "That's good. If you need any deposit or—" She held up a hand, though her tone was not combative. "I'll let you know, I promise." She paused, eyes drifting to Oliver's curious face. "I'm realizing that turning down help just out of pride might not be the best choice, at least for Oliver's sake. But I need to tread carefully." Marcus nodded, sensing the deep conflict she wrestled with. "I understand. I'll be here if you decide you want my help." They circled back toward the shelter's entrance. A crisp wind picked up, prompting Emma to wrap a small blanket around Oliver. A faint whimper escaped his lips, and Emma cooed softly until he settled again. Marcus watched the scene, feeling a quiet warmth at how natural she was with the baby. They reached the shelter doors, where Grace Sullivan was taping a flyer for the upcoming fundraiser. She glanced at Marcus, offering a kind smile. "Rough day, I assume?" "Something like that," he murmured. Grace nodded sympathetically. "Glad you're here. We have a few more fundraiser logistics to finalize." "If you can spare a moment, that is." Marcus glanced at Emma. She gave a slight nod of encouragement. "Go ahead. I'll put Oliver down for a nap." He followed Grace into her office, a sense of familiarity replacing the day's corporate chaos. As they discussed event details, catering, entertainment, an online donation platform, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every detail secured for the shelter's benefit served as a reminder that his life encompassed more than just numbers in a boardroom. He was bridging two realms, the polished business world and the raw reality of human struggle. When they finished, he stepped into the hallway. Emma reappeared, having settled Oliver in the nursery. She rubbed her tired eyes, but a gentle determination underscored her posture. "Thank you for walking with me," she said softly. "I know you have a lot on your mind. I appreciate it." He reached out impulsively, lightly touching her arm. "Sometimes you and Oliver are the only clear thing in my mind." Her eyes glimmered with an emotion that might have been gratitude, perhaps something more. They lingered for a moment, neither speaking. In the background, the hum of the shelter's everyday bustle continued, and for once, Marcus found it oddly comforting. Despite the looming threats and corporate battles, he felt anchored in this place where real lives intersected, reminding him why he fought so hard. Sunrise broke over Boston in soft shades of pink and gold, filtering through the windows of Marcus's penthouse. Instead of preparing for another day of normal business, he found himself reviewing the final Henderson proposals and the speaking points he'd planned for that afternoon's crucial investor meeting. He set aside the papers with a sigh, grabbing his phone. Swiping through photos, he stopped at one of Oliver, eyes bright, wrapped in a light blue blanket. The next was a candid shot Grace had taken. Marcus cradling Oliver in the shelter's nursery, a half smile on his own face. He barely recognized the man in that photo, looking so gentle and unguarded. A knock at his door startled him. "Come in," he called. Henry strode inside without waiting for further invitation. "You're not at the office yet?" Henry asked, voice tense. "Henderson is expecting a final walkthrough of the contract by noon." Marcus stood, smoothing his dress shirt. "I'm about to leave. Did you find any new concerns?" Henry pursed his lips. I'm more worried about your focus. The board is still skittish. You've won some goodwill by providing strong quarterly numbers, but talk about the shelter lingers. Investors want to know you'll be fully committed if we expand internationally. Marcus resisted an urge to roll his eyes. I'm aware. I'll handle it. Henry stepped forward, lowering his voice. This is bigger than the board now. Some major players are waiting to see if you'll pivot back to being the Marcus Bennett they know, the relentless deal maker, or if you've softened for good. The choice is yours. Marcus felt a flicker of anger, but tempered it. Let's just get through today's presentation. They arrived at the Bennett Properties offices, heading straight to the executive boardroom. Several Henderson representatives were already there, including their sharp-eyed CEO, Alicia Clark. She greeted Marcus with polite reserve, and the meeting commenced in a swirl of financial projections, brand synergy proposals, and strategic timelines. As discussions progressed, Marcus found himself slipping into the familiar role of a consummate businessman, confident, eloquent, relentlessly thorough. Even Henry looked impressed as Marcus parried tough questions about profit margins and expansion risks. By midday, Alicia smiled for the first time, praising the clarity of the plan. Bennett Properties has always been a powerhouse in this sector, she remarked. We're pleased with your answers, Mr. Bennett. Marcus exhaled quietly, relief surfacing. I'm glad to hear that. We look forward to a long and successful partnership. After the Henderson team departed, Henry immediately cornered Marcus. That was flawless. This is exactly what the board wants to see. Your unwavering dedication. Keep it up, and no one will question your leadership. Marcus simply nodded, though his thoughts drifted to Emma and Oliver. He refused to believe that fatherhood or compassion could be incompatible with success. Still, he recognized that many people in his corporate circle viewed empathy as a liability rather than a strength. Later that evening, he decided to drive to the shelter once again. The pitched tension of the business day left him craving the grounding presence of Emma and Oliver. When he arrived, the fundraiser planning was in full swing. Volunteers bustled about, stringing lights and organizing donation boxes. Marcus found Emma helping Charlene with a table display for raffle items. You're just in time to lift these boxes, Charlene teased, pointing to several sealed cartons labeled Decor. Marcus rolled up his sleeves. Put me to work. He heaved the boxes onto a long folding table, noticing Emma was watching him, her expression both amused and contemplative. They took a short break in a quieter corner of the shelter. Emma held Oliver, who reached out for Marcus's tie with a small grunt. Marcus chuckled, letting the baby grasp it as if it were a new toy. Thanks, buddy, he murmured, gently disentangling the fabric from Oliver's grip. Emma studied him, a soft line forming between her brows. You seem different tonight. More relaxed. He shrugged, a corner of his mouth lifting in a wry smile. We secured the Henderson deal. I guess that's a weight off my shoulders. She tilted her head. Does that mean you won't have to fight the board anymore? Marcus tucked his tie away. Not exactly. There's still the audit to deal with, and the board's skepticism about my personal life. But at least I proved I'm not neglecting the company, Oliver gurgled, and Emma bounced him gently. You really think you can keep balancing everything? This place, me and Oliver, plus that world of high-stakes deals? He reached out to steady Oliver's wobbly head, a surge of protectiveness coursing through him. I'll try, he replied quietly. I won't abandon either side. I want to be the father Oliver needs and the leader my company deserves. Emma held his gaze. You sound so sure. I'm not sure, he admitted, voice low. But I'm determined. There's a difference. For a moment, their eyes locked in a quiet exchange. The clamour of volunteers, the rustle of boxes, and the hum of overhead lights faded into the background. Marcus realized he felt closer to Emma than he ever had, even during their marriage, maybe because this time he was fighting for something beyond his own ambition. A distant call from Charlene broke the moment. "Marcus, can you come help with these banners?" He nodded and stood, Oliver's small hand still wrapped around his finger, until Emma gently pulled the baby back. As he went to assist, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The boardroom challenges and personal struggles remained, but he sensed a transformation inside himself. He was forging a new identity, a man who could wield power yet embrace vulnerability, who could sign multi-million-dollar contracts and still feed a hungry baby at a shelter. And it was a transformation he was no longer afraid to pursue. The days leading up to the fundraiser passed in a blur of last-minute planning. Posters were finalized, local businesses contributed raffle prizes, and a group of musicians from a nearby college agreed to perform pro bono. Marcus was impressed by how quickly everything came together. He found himself fully invested, calling in favors, inviting business contacts, even offering to match donations up to a certain amount. Meanwhile, the auditors poked through Bennett Properties records, occasionally requesting clarifications from Marcus. He provided every detail he could, determined to clear his name and quell suspicions of impropriety. Though Henry remained uneasy, he begrudgingly admitted that transparency was Marcus's best move. One late afternoon, Marcus was back at the shelter, kneeling beside a box of donated wine glasses for the fundraiser's refreshment area, when Grace approached. She perched on a chair, looking mildly overwhelmed. "Thank you again for stepping up. We've never attempted an event this large. It could be a game changer for us if we manage to raise enough funds." Marcus carefully unwrapped the glasses. "I'm happy to help. Just remind me how many people we expect." Grace consulted a list on her clipboard. "We're hoping for at least 200 attendees. We sent out invitations to local politicians, business owners, and some well-known public figures. Even a couple of TV stations are interested in covering it." He nodded, mentally running through final logistics. Then, hesitating, he asked, "Grace, is there any chance this media coverage could drag Emma and Oliver into the spotlight? I don't want them exploited or harassed." She frowned thoughtfully. "We'll make it clear to reporters that the focus is on the shelter's mission, not individual residents. Of course, I can't control every journalist, but I'll do my best to protect Emma's privacy." Marcus relaxed slightly. "Thank you." Just then, Emma stepped into the room, holding Oliver on her hip. "Hey, I was told there might be boxes needing unpacking." Marcus beckoned her over. "Yes, though it's mostly glassware. I've got it covered. How's Oliver?" She gave the baby a playful bounce. "He's a little fussy, but it's almost feeding time." She set Oliver in a portable playpen that Grace had brought into the room, letting him entertain himself with a rattle. Then she joined Marcus in organizing the wine glasses. With practiced efficiency, they lined them up on a folding table, ensuring nothing cracked or chipped. After a few minutes, Emma spoke quietly. "How are the auditors treating you?" He glanced sideways. "They're thorough, which is understandable, but so far nothing's come up that implicates me in any wrongdoing." She paused, her hands stilling on a roll of packing paper. "I really hope everything works out. For you and for Oliver's future." He looked at her. "I appreciate that. I know it's not easy for you to watch all this unfold." Emma shrugged, a touch of weariness in her eyes. "I feel responsible in some ways. If I hadn't run away, if I'd told you about the pregnancy earlier, maybe none of this would be happening." Marcus set a glass down, the sound of gentle clinking filling the pause. "I played my part too. I shut you out long before you left. We both made mistakes." Oliver let out a small cry, prompting Emma to scoop him up again. She stroked the baby's back. a maternal gentleness that tugged at Marcus's heart. "It's not just about mistakes," she said softly. "It's about how we move forward now." He inhaled, feeling that statement resonate deeply. Agreed. They finished unpacking the glassware, each lost in their own thoughts. Grace popped in, announcing she'd scheduled a brief run-through for the event the next morning, just to ensure everyone knew their roles. As evening arrived, Marcus took Emma aside. "I need to finalize some philanthropic details with the lawyers tomorrow. After that, I can help set up for the fundraiser. Anything specific you want me to handle?" She shifted Oliver to her other arm. "Could you maybe pick up the floral arrangements? They're being donated by a shop across town, and the owner said they need to be retrieved by noon on the event day." He pulled out his phone to type a reminder. "Done. I'll bring them over." She nodded, biting her lower lip as if weighing what to say next. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you for all of this, not just the big gestures, but for every time you've shown up." He gave her a gentle smile, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Showing up is the least I can do. I want to be here, Emma, for you and for Oliver." A flicker of emotion crossed her face, but before she could respond, someone called her name from across the room. She turned, murmuring a quick goodbye. Marcus watched as she walked away, the baby cuddled close. He felt a swirl of gratitude and an undercurrent of determination. Tomorrow would be another milestone. The fundraiser might bring attention, both positive and negative, to the shelter and to him. He had no illusions that the evening would be simple, but he also sensed that this was a chance to prove, both to the world and to himself, that compassion and success need not be at odds. A crisp winter evening enveloped the Dorchester Community Shelter as guests began to arrive for the long-anticipated fundraiser. Strings of fairy lights cast a warm glow over the parking lot, and a modest red carpet stretched to the front entrance. Volunteers bustled about, directing attendees and welcoming local dignitaries. The hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter drifted through the air. Marcus stood near the entrance, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that blended his corporate world with the sincerity he felt for the cause. He greeted business acquaintances, gently deflecting attempts to pry into his personal life. A local news station had set up a small camera crew by the doors, capturing footage of the event. A few reporters snapped photos, occasionally shouting questions about Bennett properties. Marcus responded politely, but kept the focus on the shelter and its mission. Inside the main hall, tables lined with silent auction items extended along one wall. Fresh flowers adorned each table, arrangements Marcus had picked up earlier that afternoon. The center of the room was cleared for mingling, with soft jazz provided by the college musicians. Guests sampled appetizers from donated catering stations, while volunteers explained the shelter's programs. Emma stepped out from behind a makeshift coat check area, her eyes scanning the crowd. She wore a simple navy dress, and though she looked slightly self-conscious, Marcus thought she carried herself with quiet grace. Oliver was temporarily with Charlene in the nursery, allowing Emma a bit of freedom to greet supporters. Marcus made his way to her side. "You look great," he said softly. A faint blush touched her cheeks. "Thanks. It's been a while since I dressed up. Usually I'm covered in spit-up by this time of night." He chuckled. "Oliver's in good hands with Charlene. You deserve a break." Across the room, Grace Sullivan tapped a microphone to get everyone's attention. Her warm smile radiated excitement. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Dorchester Community Shelter's first Night of Hope fundraiser. We are honored by your presence and generosity. We'd like to share a short video showcasing the work we do and the impact your support can make." Lights dimmed as a projector played a poignant montage of the shelter's daily life. Volunteers serving meals, children giggling in art classes, mothers learning job skills, and the cramped sleeping quarters that needed expansion. Emma and Marcus stood together, watching. The final clip featured Grace explaining her vision for transforming part of the building into more private family rooms. As the lights came back on, applause broke out. Grace resumed the mic. "We hope you'll contribute what you can so we can provide a safer, more dignified space for families in need." The evening progressed with the silent auction, excited chatter, and the gentle clink of wine glasses. Marcus noticed a few of Bennett Properties board members in attendance, Sarah Ludlow among them, carefully observing the event. He wasn't sure if they were there out of genuine interest or to gauge his actions. Regardless, he approached them politely, highlighting the shelter's mission. Sarah studied the displays with a critical eye, yet her demeanor softened when she saw the photos of children benefiting from the programs. "I never realized how crowded these facilities can get," she admitted. Marcus nodded. "That's why expansions are so crucial. Lack of privacy and space can discourage families from seeking help." Sarah ran a finger over the edge of a donation box. "Well, I can see this is a cause worth supporting. The turnout is impressive, too." A wave of satisfaction coursed through Marcus. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Midway through the night, the hush of conversation shifted as people turned toward the entrance. Richard Bennett walked in, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, accompanied by Lydia Morgan. They exchanged brief greetings with attendees, then locked eyes with Marcus. He felt a spike of tension, but he forced a cordial smile. Richard approached slowly, glancing around. "Quite the setup," he remarked, tone guarded. Lydia hovered just behind him, scanning the crowd. Marcus inclined his head. "I'm surprised you came. I wasn't sure this event would align with your preferences." Richard's gaze swept across the room. "I wanted to see for myself the place that's taken so much of your time." And Lydia thought it might be beneficial to manage any media presence related to Bennett Properties. Marcus bit back a retort, aware of Emma watching from a nearby table. He motioned politely. "We have coverage from a local station, but they're here mainly for the shelter. Feel free to mingle." Richard gave a curt nod and drifted off, Lydia in tow, greeting a few well-dressed guests. Marcus felt a subtle knot in his stomach. He didn't need a confrontation tonight, especially not in front of donors. Needing a moment of reprieve, Marcus made his way to Emma. She stood near the nursery door, checking on Oliver, who had just woken from a short nap. The baby reached out when he saw Marcus, and Emma smiled. "Your father's here?" Marcus grimaced, glancing over his shoulder. "Yes, he is." Emma studied his face. "Are you okay?" He forced a small smile. "I'll manage. Let's focus on making this event a success." Emma nodded, then gently placed Oliver in his arms. The baby cooed, and Marcus felt a calming warmth spread through him. Some of the tension in his chest eased. In a few hours, they would know how much money was raised. Beyond that, the night symbolized something more, a test of how well he could stand by his convictions under the scrutiny of family and colleagues alike. A sudden hush fell over the crowd again. Marcus turned to see Grace returning to the microphone, presumably to announce the ongoing tally of donations. Holding Oliver close, he braced himself for whatever came next, determined to stay true to the path he'd chosen, even if it meant confronting his father's disapproval under the bright lights of the very world he once ruled with unwavering ambition. A subtle tension lingered in the air after the fundraiser drew to a close. As the crowd dispersed, volunteers moved swiftly to pack up tables and decorations. The hum of conversations died down, replaced by a quieter sense of accomplishment. In a corner of the main hall, Marcus helped Charlene gather leftover auction items. His tie hung loose around his neck, shirt collar open. Nearby, Emma cradled Oliver, who had drifted off amid the earlier excitement. Grace Sullivan stood at the microphone once more, offering heartfelt thanks to the departing guests. Although final figures weren't announced yet, there was a sense that the shelter had exceeded its initial goals. A few local reporters lingered, snapping photos as they wrapped up interviews with donors. Marcus caught his father's eye from across the room. Richard was speaking in low tones with Lydia Morgan, their postures revealing a private conversation. When Richard stepped away, Lydia approached Marcus, wearing a polite but guarded smile. "That was quite an event," she remarked, tapping a small notepad. "I've been collecting statements to issue a release for the press. I'll keep it focused on your philanthropic angle, highlighting how Bennett Properties' CEO is dedicated to community outreach." Marcus noted the slight edge in her voice. "That would be appreciated, Lydia. I'd like to keep the emphasis on the shelter's needs. Though the real story is about the families here." She nodded, but her eyes remained cool. "Understood. Congratulations on the strong turnout." Then, with a final glance at Emma and Oliver, she excused herself to join Richard by the door. A tightness formed in Marcus's chest as he realized his father was about to leave. He made his way over, determined not to let Richard slip out without a word. "I'm glad you came," Marcus began, voice subdued. Richard merely gave a faint nod. "The turnout was better than I expected. I suppose you've proven your point, that you can raise money for this place and still command a crowd of investors." Marcus glanced around, noticing a few stragglers observing their interaction. He lowered his voice. "This wasn't just about proving a point. The shelter genuinely needs the funds. These people have nowhere else to go." Richard's eyes flicked over the modest decor and the tired volunteers stacking chairs. "It's noble, but let's not forget the company is still under scrutiny. You'll have to deal with the auditor's final report soon. Don't let tonight's success distract you from that." Marcus inhaled, keeping his composure. "I'm aware. If the board wants to vote me out, they'll do it regardless of how many funds we raised here, but I'm not backing down. I can do both, run Bennett Properties and support Emma and Oliver." For a fleeting moment, Richard's expression wavered, as though torn between admiration and annoyance. He straightened his tie. "We'll see, son. For now, I'll look forward to the auditor's findings. Good night." As Richard left with Lydia, Marcus felt a swirl of uncertainty. Despite the evening's success, there was no guarantee of how the corporate storyline would play out. He forced himself to breathe steadily, reminding himself that he'd done all he could for the fundraiser and the shelter. Emma approached, Oliver sleeping soundly in her arms. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. He managed a small smile. "Better, now that the event is over. Are you okay? It must have been overwhelming, so many people, cameras flashing everywhere." She nodded, shifting Oliver's weight. "It was intense, but I'm proud of what we accomplished tonight. People seemed genuinely moved." He noticed the smudges of fatigue under her eyes and reached out to gently brush a lock of hair behind her ear. "You need rest. Maybe I can drive you two back, so you're not stuck waiting for a bus in the cold." She hesitated, as if weighing her options, then gave a slight nod. "That would be nice. I can't imagine juggling Oliver on a bus after all this." They gathered their belongings, said goodbye to Grace, and slipped out into the night. The crisp air carried the faint scent of car exhaust and distant wood smoke. Emma carefully buckled Oliver into a car seat Marcus had installed earlier, ensuring his comfort. During the drive, neither spoke much. The headlights cut through dark streets, and Emma occasionally glanced back at Oliver to confirm he was still asleep. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, although 1,000 thoughts swirled in his head. Richard's aloof approval, Lydia's suspicious interest, the uncertain future of his role at Bennett Properties. Yet the sound of Oliver's steady breathing reminded him of the quiet rewards that came with this new life path. When they arrived at the shelter's entrance, Emma unbuckled Oliver and carefully lifted him out. Marcus opened the door for her, the cold air biting his cheeks. She cradled the baby protectively as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "Thank you for everything tonight," she said softly. "Not just the ride, but all of it. Helping Grace, organizing donors, staying for the whole event." He nodded, resisting the urge to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Any time." She stood there for a moment, perhaps considering whether to invite him inside. But Oliver stirred in her arms, and her attention diverted to soothing him. With a final, grateful glance, she turned toward the shelter's doors. Marcus watched her go, his breath visible in the cold air, mindful of the vulnerability in his own heart. Something about the hush of this nighttime scene told him that, despite the lingering tensions, they'd moved one step closer to a genuine sense of belonging, something far more valuable than any corporate triumph. A few days after the fundraiser, Marcus found himself standing outside his usual coffee spot near Beacon Hill, sipping a latte in the crisp morning air. The city hummed with weekday energy. Business suits rushed by, cars honked in slow traffic, and a street musician played a mellow tune on saxophone. Normally, Marcus would be busy scanning emails or taking calls. Today, he paused to enjoy the small moment of tranquility, reflecting on how different his priorities felt lately. He headed to the Bennett Properties building for a scheduled meeting with the auditors. Inside the vast lobby, polished floors shone under bright lights, and a steady stream of employees hurried to their offices. Marcus noticed how subdued some of the greetings felt. Colleagues nodded politely, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty in their eyes. No doubt the rumor mill was still churning, speculating about potential leadership changes. Up on the 38th floor, he stepped into a conference room where two auditors, one man and one woman, waited with laptops open and ledgers stacked on the table. Henry Caldwell was already there, tension etched into every line of his face. The auditors rose to greet Marcus. "Thank you for joining us," said the woman, who introduced herself as Linda Green. "We've completed a thorough review of the philanthropic transactions and other financial allocations in question. We'd like to walk you through our findings." Marcus gave a brief nod, heart pounding. "I appreciate your diligence. I'm ready to listen." Linda opened her laptop and cleared her throat. "First, we examined any overlaps between your personal contributions and the Bennett Properties Foundation. We found no evidence of misappropriated company funds." A swirl of relief rushed through him, though he kept his composure. Linda continued. "However, there were a few minor discrepancies regarding staff hours billed for philanthropic PR work. It appears Ms. Lydia Morgan recorded some tasks under Bennett Properties accounts, but we see no direct authorization from you for that billing." Henry's mouth flattened into a tight line. "So there's no major violation?" Linda shook her head. "No, it's more of a procedural oversight. We recommend clarifying how employees allocate their time when dealing with philanthropic endeavors." Marcus inhaled slowly, absorbing the weight lifted from his shoulders. "We'll implement those recommendations. Is there anything else?" The male auditor, Patrick, glanced at his notes. "No significant findings. Your corporate finances remain robust. As for the shelter donations, they appear to be entirely from your personal funds. We see no conflict of interest as long as it's disclosed accurately in the future." Henry closed his own file with a subdued sense of acceptance. "Then we can finalize this at the next board meeting," Linda agreed. "Yes, we'll present an official statement of compliance. Assuming the board has no further concerns, this matter should be resolved." Marcus thanked them, relief tinged with cautious optimism. After the auditors left, Henry lingered, flipping a pen between his fingers. "This is good news, but let's not forget the board still wants your focus on the company's expansion." Marcus leveled a calm gaze. "I understand. and I'll continue to ensure Bennett Properties thrives." Henry gave him a curt nod and left. Alone, Marcus sank into a chair, exhaling in a wave of gratitude and exhaustion. This was the best outcome he could have hoped for, a green light suggesting that his role as CEO might remain secure, provided he balanced the philanthropic side with corporate demands. Later that day, he stopped by the shelter. He found Emma in the nursery, rocking Oliver. The baby was babbling happily, clearly more animated than before. Marcus crouched to tickle his son's tiny feet, smiling when Oliver let out a delighted squeal. Emma raised an eyebrow. "You look relaxed. Did something happen?" Marcus settled onto a low stool, feeling a wave of warmth at seeing Oliver's bright eyes. "The auditors cleared me. No major issues. I can keep my position, assuming the board goes along with their report." She studied him for a moment. "That's amazing." "I'm glad." He reached for Oliver, lifting the baby into his arms. "I am too. It means I can support you and him more consistently." Emma nodded, her expression relieved. "I know it's been hanging over your head. So, what now?" Marcus rocked Oliver gently. "I'll keep working on expansions, but I also want to help with the shelter's next phase. Grace mentioned plans to convert part of the old wing into more family rooms. Maybe we can combine personal and foundation funds for that." Emma's shoulders eased, tension melting away. "Thank you." Oliver gurgled, patting Marcus's cheek with a soft hand. The contact felt electric, a tangible reminder of what mattered most. For the first time in months, Marcus sensed he was returning to a semblance of normalcy, except it was a new normal, one shaped by fatherhood, empathy, and the humbling experiences at the shelter. Later, as he left, he noticed the quiet sense of purpose that filled him. Perhaps the real shift wasn't just about balancing corporate responsibilities with philanthropic ones. It was about seeing his life through a lens of care and commitment to the people who depended on him. And in that sense, stepping back into his corporate world felt different, as if he was bringing a piece of the shelter's compassion with him wherever he went. A week passed, and the Dorchester Community Shelter found itself teeming with renewed energy. The fundraiser's success had brought in donations large and small, each one adding to the shelter's reserves and fueling future projects. Grace orchestrated a team of volunteers and social workers to plan the expansion of the family wing. Walls would be repainted, unused storage rooms transformed into private living quarters, and additional staff hired for childcare support. Marcus visited often to watch the progress unfold. He offered advice on layout and construction, tapping into his real estate expertise. Initially, some volunteers were hesitant, uncertain if a high-powered businessman could understand the daily struggles of shelter life. But as the days wore on, they saw him hauling supplies, speaking kindly to residents, and devoting real time to the project. Little by little, their skepticism faded. Meanwhile, Emma began attending small workshops to learn more about job readiness programs. She also shared her experiences with newer residents, many of whom were frightened young mothers unsure of what lay ahead. Her story, once a source of shame, became an inspiration, showing that resilience was possible even when everything seemed lost. One afternoon, Grace invited Emma to speak to a small group of women preparing to leave the shelter. Marcus quietly slipped into the back of the room, cradling Oliver, who was napping. Emma stood at the front, posture straight, though a flicker of nerves showed in her hands. "I never thought I'd end up here," she began, voice soft but steady. "I used to live in a world of fancy clothes and big parties, thinking I had everything. But sometimes the biggest loss isn't money, it's losing yourself and the people who matter." A hush fell as she recounted how fear drove her to hide her pregnancy, then flee from Marcus. She spoke of the isolation of a high-risk pregnancy without support, The desperation of draining her finances and the eventual courage to walk into the shelter doors. Several women dabbed tears from their eyes, relating on a personal level. Marcus felt his own throat tighten. Oliver stirred against his chest, and he glanced down to see the baby's tiny face scrunch in sleep. He gently rocked him, thoughts churning with pride for Emma's strength. The Emma he once knew had been genteel and outwardly gracious but reserved, not accustomed to public vulnerability. Now she stood before others, revealing her pain to uplift them. After the talk ended, quiet applause filled the room. A few residents approached Emma to thank her. Marcus slipped out, mindful of Oliver's whimpers, and found a quiet corner in the hallway to settle the baby again. Minutes later, Emma appeared, looking both relieved and buoyed by the experience. "You were amazing," he murmured, offering a one-armed hug while balancing Oliver. She let out a shaky laugh. "I was terrified." But they seemed to appreciate hearing something real. Marcus nodded, shifting Oliver, who had woken and was making playful grabbing motions toward Emma's hair. "I think you gave them hope, knowing someone else went through the worst and still found a path forward." Emma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, gently taking Oliver from his arms. "I hope so. I remember how alone I felt. If even one person feels less scared because I shared my story, it's worth it." They walked together through the hallway, heading toward the half-constructed family wing. Workers had begun tearing down old partitions and salvaging materials. The sharp smell of sawdust and fresh paint filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the typical hush of the shelter's corridors, but an undercurrent of excitement buzzed among staff and volunteers. Marcus paused by a large blueprint taped to the wall. "They're planning to add 5 extra rooms here, each with a small kitchenette. That'll make a huge difference for families who need privacy and independence." Emma rocked Oliver, who was babbling happily. "It's incredible to see this place changing so fast. After living here, I know how valuable personal space is for moms with newborns." He traced a finger along the blueprint lines. "I'm thinking about inviting some of my corporate colleagues to a walkthrough once construction is further along. Show them how far these donations go. Maybe encourage more involvement." Emma tilted her head. "Wouldn't that raise eyebrows again?" He gave a slight chuckle. "Probably. But if I've learned anything, it's that it doesn't matter. If the board wants to question me, so be it. We've established that I'm not misusing company funds. I'd rather they see firsthand how philanthropy can be a worthwhile investment in the community." Her smile was soft. "You're fearless." He arched an eyebrow. "I wouldn't say fearless. I'm just finally learning what's worth fighting for." They continued along the corridor, discussing future plans for the shelter, sharing small jokes about Oliver's changing sleeping habits, and noticing how he kicked his legs whenever new faces passed by. In this simple act of collaboration, they discovered an unspoken harmony, a sense that their separate journeys had led them here to a place of rediscovered hope, ready to share what they'd learned with those who needed it most. Morning light streamed through the high windows of Marcus's penthouse, illuminating the living area with a soft glow. He was no longer alone. Oliver lay on a plush blanket spread across the floor, giggling at the colorful baby toys scattered around. Emma sat nearby, sipping tea, her eyes darting between Oliver's curious movements and the city skyline outside. They had stopped by to finalize a few details about the new family wing's development plans before heading to the shelter together. Seeing Emma and Oliver in his usually silent space filled Marcus with a quiet, deep-seated contentment. He recalled how the same apartment once felt like a hollow fortress, a testament to his success, yet utterly devoid of warmth. Now, it felt alive. He walked over to Oliver, scooping him up and chuckling when the baby grabbed his tie. "You still going for my tie, huh?" he teased, gently prying the fabric from Oliver's tiny fist. The baby responded with a delighted squeal. Emma watched them, a softness in her gaze. It's strange being back in this penthouse. I remember how lonely it felt after I left. But now, she trailed off, as if sensing the change in atmosphere. He smiled at her, adjusting Oliver in his arms. Everything's different, and it's not just the furniture. They were interrupted by his phone buzzing on the table. Marcus frowned, setting Oliver into a small bouncer and moving to answer. To his surprise, it was Henry Caldwell. He picked up. "Henry, good morning." Henry's voice sounded oddly calm. "Marcus, I just finished talking to the board. They reviewed the auditor's final statements and are prepared to release a formal document clearing you of any wrongdoing." A wave of relief coursed through him. "That's excellent news." Henry hesitated. "Yes, the official vote is next week, but I think you have enough support to remain CEO. Even Richard's not pushing back now that the numbers are solid." Marcus smiled, glancing at Emma. "I appreciate the update, Henry." "You deserve the credit," Henry continued, his tone softening. "It hasn't been easy, but you never lost your focus on the company's performance. Anyway, just thought you should know." Ending the call, Marcus exhaled, shoulders relaxing. Emma watched expectantly. "Good news." He nodded, a slow grin forming. "It looks like the board won't be challenging my position after all." Emma set down her tea, a flicker of relief passing over her features. "I'm really glad." He moved closer to the bouncer, where Oliver kicked his legs contentedly. "So am I. It means we can move forward without that cloud hanging over everything." They decided to leave for the shelter, driving in Marcus's car through the bustling Boston streets. The conversation flowed easily about the upcoming schedule of construction at the shelter, Emma's progress in job readiness classes, Oliver's new habit of cooing at every passing car. Though small, each detail underscored how much their lives had intertwined. When they arrived, they found Grace in her office, talking with a woman who appeared in her mid-40s, looking anxious and clutching a small duffel bag. Grace introduced her as Angela, a newcomer who had fled a difficult situation. While Emma took Oliver to the nursery, Marcus stayed behind, listening as Angela explained she had nowhere else to go. Grace offered a comforting hand on Angela's shoulder, assuring her that the shelter would provide a temporary safe space. Moved by the conversation, Marcus interjected gently, "If there's anything you need, clothes, supplies, or references for local job openings, please let me know. I'm sure we can help you get started." Angela blinked back tears, a look of gratitude crossing her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I never expected to get help so quickly." After Angela was settled, Grace turned to Marcus with a half-smile. "You have a knack for putting people at ease lately." Marcus gave a modest shrug. "I'm just offering what I can." As they walked down the hall, passing the new construction zone, the sound of hammering and drills echoed. Emma emerged from the nursery, meeting them part way. Oliver was wide awake, watching everything with bright curiosity. Emma carefully passed the baby to Marcus, who kissed Oliver's forehead. Grace paused at a stack of fresh lumber. "It's amazing how fast this renovation is happening now that we have funds and the right connections. Families like Angela's will have more privacy, better facilities." Marcus surveyed the area, imagining it complete. A series of small, comfortable rooms. "I can't wait to see this wing filled with families who feel safe and supported." Emma brushed a hand over the wooden beams, a pensive smile on her lips. "It's more than just walls. It's hope for people who feel like they've run out of options." Oliver reached out, patting the air as if sensing everyone's energy. Marcus held him closer. "He's going to grow up knowing what it means to help others. I never had that sense growing up, not in the same way." Grace's eyes flicked between them, a warm understanding in her gaze. We often find our best selves when we're helping someone else, don't we? They continued their impromptu tour, discussing the timeline for the project, budgets, and how to integrate volunteers more efficiently. Throughout it all, Oliver's small gurgles and Emma's gentle presence reminded Marcus why this work felt so vital. Later, in a quiet moment near the shelter's entrance, Marcus and Emma stood side by side. She balanced Oliver on her hip as he grabbed for her necklace. The chatter of volunteers, the distant thud of construction, and the faint hum of traffic outside formed a soothing backdrop. Marcus glanced at Emma, letting out a soft breath. "We've come a long way. There's still so much to do, but I finally feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." She nodded, shifting Oliver's weight and looking at Marcus with a mix of tenderness and resolve. Her eyes seemed to say that this journey, one of rediscovery, forgiveness, and shared dedication, was only beginning. And for the first time, it felt like that open road ahead was bright with the promise of a new dawn they would face together, with Oliver at the heart of it all. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.